Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, members of the Joint Committee. It's good to be here and present to you the master plan for the Wyoming State Fair. Okay. It's really throwing me off too. I can't talk and listen to my own voice. So we good to go now? Okay, great. Okay. Okay, good deal. All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's good to be here. Thanks for taking some time to hear about the strategic plan for the Wyoming State Fair. I'm joined with the director of the State Fair, Courtney Conkle. And I just want to give you an update since you will be seeing some requests coming through with the Capcom bill. Just want to make sure that you know we're updated as to the entire context in which that request is happening, both operationally and in terms of the plans for the facilities on the fairgrounds. So I'll do my best to be respectful of your time. And certainly we have the subject matter expert here as well to answer any questions that probably won't be too far to go over my head with. So just, you know, we went ahead and provided the information the State Fair gave the Ag Committee to you. And if I could just briefly direct your attention to page 9 of that PowerPoint slide, you'll see the trend is good for revenues to the State Fair. That's a result of our bill we had a few years back dealing with the State Fair Board. I think probably something that we could look back on for something that's worked the way that we intended to and has been a success. You know, getting the proper expertise there to help direct the State Fair and recognizing that, you know, you need folks with, you know, whether it be state parks or tourism, have that sort of experience, event management experience on the board to help you know, set the fair on the right path. And of course, they've made some very good personnel decisions, the director being one of them, but she has a good team there working hard to make sure that that everything's that they're maximizing revenue to the greatest extent possible. So you see that trend there both for fair and non-fair events. I don't have that in front of me right now, but it has been a significant year-over-year increase. I want to make sure that we understand that because I've heard some discussion that just because we were one of the 3 fairs or states to have a state fair during 2020, it wasn't just a one-time event. It's been continuous, and this is a trend that doesn't necessarily have to do with COVID and the lockdowns that happened in 2020. So I want to make sure we understand that the fair is on a very good trajectory towards self-sustainment. Obviously, that's a long ways to go, but we're getting there. We should see those year-over-year increases consistently. And that's also, you can say that for, you know, people through the gate as well, even though they've been, for the longest time, we had a $1 admission fee. And, you know, I think what, it's $8 now. And you still see that gate attendance going up. You have more vendors there, you have more people going. So overall, it's been a pretty good success story. So I wanted to say that because I think it's important that, you know, that if we ask for something, you know, in terms of a strategic plan or capital construction, that there's, you know, we can demonstrate that those funds are being put to good use and the operations that happen within those buildings are worthwhile as well. So about that same time, 2020, you know, just before the pandemic started, came out with a strategic plan or master plan, excuse me. And you'll have a copy of that as well, Mr. Chairman. So certainly there's more information, including Appendix A, which is over 400 pages of a market analysis But you'll see section 5 and looking page 5-2, kind of the laundry list of potential projects for capital construction. And so I believe the one you'll see here is for removal of a very old and inadequate dormitory. I think that's in the governor's request for this go around for capital construction. So I just want to highlight that there's been a lot of maintenance that's already happened. And some of these items have met, I'd say roughly half of the near-term items have already been checked off the list without our intervention in the legislature. But now we're at the point of doing projects, about $500,000 to safely remove this very old and out-of-date building. So we'll see a request for that. I also want to highlight the next major project that would be coming down the line. I just went out for RFQ recently, and that's to cover one of the horse arenas. And I think there's an opportunity there, especially if you look at the market analysis of getting lots of folks, especially from that area just to the south of us, that feel a little displaced, that want to come up here and have our equine events at the state fair. And if you cover that arena, that increases our capacity significantly and will increase our revenue as a result. And so if the director can give more information as to why that is, but that's kind of the summary for now. And I just want to highlight those two projects that'll be coming before this committee, as well as just give a general update as to how it's been going since that state fair board has been in effect. And so with that, I'll go ahead and stop, and either the director and I can answer some questions.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Senator Boner. Do you guys get major maintenance dollars for the facility?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, yes, we do. We do get major maintenance funding on an annual basis. So right now we are working on our 2023 submissions. We also have 19 projects that are currently underway. Many of them do pertain directly to the master plan, and some are exclusive to health and life safety needs that are currently in effect and taking place on the grounds right now.
So follow up, Mr. Chairman. So your major maintenance list is included in the costs and everything on your master plan list, but you're working on that. So who do you make your request to when you do major maintenance?
So we do submit as a part of the Department of Agriculture still, and then it's reviewed by Construction Authority, and we work directly with Construction Authority and our project manager on the implementation of approved projects.
Thank you.
Okay, why don't you just walk through your particular requests so we understand them.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman, if I could ask one other question.
Sure.
So then you've got your request on page 25 and 26 of the CapCon bill, right? It is for this year, as we're looking at the Fort Washakie demolition. And then is there an additional one? It's just that 450.
Just that one, Mr. Vice Chairman. Yes.
Thank you.
So my question is that we're not going to have this kind of surplus probably again. Maybe you should ask for more.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know how to respond to that. That's
He's not feeling well.
okay. And we do see value in making sure the committee is aware of that. And, we're not looking to, jump the gun or advance projects in the process further than they've already gone, especially when it comes to covering the silver arena. But to be frank, you read stories in the news about, other capital construction processes where that has been the case. And
what's the size of your endowment account?
Currently, it's just over 3.7 million.
Okay, further questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
so how close are you to having a projection, unless it's in the larger presentation, a projection is the cash flow that, you'd be able to, let's say that there's a low interest loan that you might be able to retire over 20, 25 years. How close are we to having a pro forma on what you think this might do?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, when they did the initial market analysis back in 2019 for release in 2020, it was of course pre-pandemic, So both the pricing of the structure that we looked at when we were doing the initial master plan and the income levels that we were anticipating it to bring in have changed, which will be addressed in that level 1, level 2 feasibility study. But throughout the master plan, it does identify around $125,000 in new revenue on an annual basis that we would be able to add in addition to what we currently make off of the Silver Arena as an uncovered pavilion currently. I would not want to speak out of terms, but I do see that increasing significantly above that $125,000 annual mark if we were able to build the Silver Arena today.
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, just to follow up, if I may.
Oh,
So I'm looking at the CapCon, at least what I have here in terms of a cliff note. And I'm not seeing the level 1, level 2 funding. Is this included in the level 1, level 2 so far, or will it be? Kevin?
Mr. Chairman, Senator,
Yes.
we presented the level 1, level 2 feasibility study request last summer, and then it was approved earlier this year. So we do have that funding encumbered. And we just recently scored those RFQs. We had several responses that were all exciting to see. So we will be getting that underway here very, very soon.
go ahead.
So as I look at 5-2, remove the Fort Washakie, the create parking area is 232,000, and we're asking for 452. So walk me through that.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, there was asbestos that we did not anticipate having. So that remediation added around $170,000 of additional expense.
It's the only place we ever had that.
We apologize.
Go ahead. Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really appreciate the update on the master plan. It's my understanding it's been a few years since that was created. And looking at all the good things that are happening and considering the role, the potential and the role of the fair endowment. Do you have any concerns regarding implementation and update of the master plan over the next year to biennium, like through say 26, 27 timeframe?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think that, and certainly the director can go into more detail, but they have been rather flexible in the way they've administered it. And, that can probably give you an example of things that were on the plan that all of a sudden became unnecessary, or they were maybe planning on removing a building that now they can see some use for now that they've changed their operations up a little bit. So when we were discussing this before we came down, I was really impressed with, definitely have laser focus on getting the strategic plan done, but also you have an adequate amount of flexibility to just not be, mindlessly, checking boxes off the checklist. So yeah, I think there's been a good balance there and focus, but also being able to adapt.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as a quick follow-up, regarding the fair endowment, are there any concerns? I mean, I know a few years ago, a good move was made to transfer those funds from the standard pool to the A pool to hopefully generate a bigger and more importantly, a potential future growth opportunity. Any concerns in that area?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, yes, we do have some concerns. There is currently discussion being had about a $5 million cap for that A pool fund, which would take the endowment fund, which is currently at just over 3.7 million, out of that high yield investment. As we've discussed time and time again, if we keep growing the endowment at the current rate that it's growing with our year-over-year contributions, within 70 years, we would be able to be fully self-sustaining, which I know sounds like a long time, but when we talk about an organization that's been in place since 1905, it's not that far away. It's something that could be a potential stumbling block for us moving forward in the event that we are put into a lower yield account.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to provide a comparative example, I believe this last year's earnings were somewhere in the neighborhood of 156,000 compared to the initial year of earnings was 17,000. So how does that amount of earnings compare to your your requirements. I know one year there was a request for an implement, for helping with your landscape and your ground maintenance. So how's that fitting in with your schedule, your work schedule and so forth?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, it does depend slightly on when that money actually hits our account as revenue. And so we don't budget it specifically. We add it into our full contributions. We have two major budgets that we utilize, not counting the State Fair Board budget. That's 0801, which is our fair time and operations budget, which does have a general fund appropriation still. And then there's 0803, which is entirely other funds. It's self-funded. The endowment fund contributes to 0801, and that's something where we put some of those contributions towards our 900 series and our 200 series.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, if we're worried about the endowment being below $5 million, all these one-time funds, maybe that's something the committee can help us with. I don't know. We'll see. Oh, sorry. Yeah, just, just a reminder, if we have all these one-time funds and certainly lots of discussion around, putting money away and endowments for specific purposes. I know that's, controversial to some folks, but, just remind that the State Fair endowment is out there, and that's another option available to us if we want to, stock away some of these one-time funds for long-term benefit.
Okay, further questions? It is Christmas, Okay, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Senator Boner. And it's a pleasure to have you at the State Fair, and I appreciate your professionalism and your expertise.
Merry Christmas. All right, next. Mental health.
It's the mental health board.
Our apologies for the delay, and thank you for your patience.
Yeah.
It's enough to make you need a mental health professional. I didn't smile when I said that.
Greg, welcome. Sorry, I keep you waiting. So please proceed.
Thank you. Chairman Nicholas, Co-Chairman Kinski. I'm Greg Searles. I'm the Executive Director for the Mental Health Professions Licensing Board. I am part of the Professional Licensing Board office under A&I, which houses 20 of the professional licensing boards in the office, or in the state, excuse me. Also online, we have the office manager, Joanne Reed, in case we need to contact her as well.
Okay.
I'm here today to discuss our requests for some additional expending authority due to the increased number of mental health applications and renewals that we see in the office. As the governor stated this morning, applications in 2019, we received 181 applications for the entire year. This year to date, we've received 416 applications to process.
So the genesis of these applications, are they part of the residuary of ARPA dollars or other types of stimulus dollars? Or do you think it's just part of the, what's interstate practice? What's causing it?
Chairman Nicholas, I believe a lot of it is telepractice that grew immensely over the times of COVID that are allowing other people to practice in the state. At this point, none of the mental health professions have a professional compact in place to allow interstate practice, although there is proposed one coming through the legislature this session that joint labor will be bringing forth for the counselors in the state. But that still will not apply to social workers, marriage and family therapists, or addictions professionals.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
And so with that, we have brought forward a couple requests for you. The first one being in the 800 series, and that may seem a little odd to you. As I said, the Professional Licensing Board office is part of A&I. So A&I is responsible for paying our salaries and wages to those that work in the PLB office. The boards then reimburse through the 800 series back to 006 for those fees. And that's why it's in 800. So we've requested an additional $39,946 in administrative services. As I said, With that major increase, it takes a lot of additional time, being that we still receive all paper applications and paper documents to process our applications. And so how our office bills is similar to what I believe an attorney would bill, that if you're working with this case for 15 minutes, you're billing that for 15 minutes. Well, in my case, with my 7 different boards, I'm billing out to those 7 different boards on a daily basis for the time I spend working with them. And so this increased amount will help provide the mental health board the ability to reimburse back to 006 for the shares of services that are spent with mental health. And please remember that these are all special fund dollars. None of this is general fund money. All fees received by the mental health board and the other boards in our office come from licensing fees and other associated fees that the boards are allowed to charge under their statutory authority. And this is not general fund money. And then our second request and third request kind of go hand in hand. The $103,350, that is for these are both pass-through fees. In 2021, this body gave the Mental Health Professions Licensing Board Office the ability to perform background checks as part of the licensing process. And so the $103,350 is to reimburse DCI for those fees to perform those background checks. We charge the applicant that fee and then pay DCI for that. The third request of $18,400 is to help with the fees for the National Practitioners Database. This is a federal database that all medical boards medical boards are required to participate in and inform them if there's disciplinary action or things like that against the licensee in the state. And what this does is allows us to continually monitor those that are licensed in Wyoming, especially if they're licensed in another jurisdiction. So if something would occur in another jurisdiction where they were disciplined, we would immediately receive notification that something had occurred. And then we could therefore possibly take action if it was also a violation here in Wyoming or was so severe that their license needed to be possibly revoked here as well. And so with that, I would stand for questions.
Questions? Oh, I got to stay after lunch. See, it's good. It's a good thing. Okay, go ahead.
Just one, and it's kind of, but are you seeing any increased interest in licensure? We've been having a hard time getting mental health professionals into the state, even through the telehealth thing. Is anything changing there?
Excuse me, Chairman Nicholas, Co-Chair Kinski, Representative Larson. There's definitely an increase in licensure, and I think a lot of it has to do with telepractice. But there's still only so many professionals out there to provide these services. And every state that we talk to has a shortfall in those to be able to provide services. But we do believe that, it allows for more options for those that are in Wyoming. It also allows for continuity of care for those that may be visiting for some reason, or perhaps coming to live with parents to take care of them, that they can receive the continuity of care from the same professional that they were seeing in another jurisdiction while they're here in Wyoming.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Please go ahead.
So do we offer we don't have an Interstate Practice Act, but do we offer reciprocity on some terms?
Chairman Nicholas, Co-Chair Kinski, we do have an endorsement process through the state of Wyoming for the Mental Health Board. And what we do is require documentation that they've got the proper degree as outlined in the statute that's required for licensure, that they've taken the proper national exam at the proper level, and that they have a license in good standing in another jurisdiction. So they only need to provide those documents to us along with the application, the background check, the NPDB fees, and we can process those.
I see. And Mr. Chairman, if I may, and then the national exam, what if a professional took that 15 years ago? That doesn't matter. You don't make them take it again. It's as long as they took it appropriately and have a current license, and they're good to go.
Chairman Nicholas, Co-Chair Kinski, correct. The legislative dictated that to us, that anybody that's been licensed longer than 10 years does not have to show verification of that exam.
All right.
So we do not require it.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Okay. Any further questions? All right. Thanks a lot. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. I appreciate your time
Have
as
a
well.
good rest of the day. Okay, Business Council. I think you're up next. Welcome, Josh. Fire away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, with me today, I have Amy Grenfell. My name is Josh Durrell. I'm the CEO of the Business Council. We do have a presentation to share. I'm on Zoom. I think I can join as a panelist and share that presentation with you. You do have copies, hard copies. So as we begin going through the budget, I'll use that as a tool to walk through the governor's recommended change to our budget. And so give me just a moment, I'll get that together.
Okay. Everyone found the handouts on the front of your box? It looks like this.
Yeah, yes, Mr. Chairman, that is the correct.
Yeah. Go ahead,
Thank
Jim.
you. Thank you. So
It's on the screen too.
it is on the screen now as well, and thank you for that. I think the thing to think about here is that on page 10 of our
Pull that
budget.
mic a little closer.
You bet. How's that?
Better.
Okay.
I hear the echo, then I know it's working right.
All right. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee. I wanted to just quickly walk through the $30 million request that the governor had for our budget. Before I get started, I think it's important for us to just sort of help you understand the way we approach our budget each year and each biennium. One of the things that we wanted to always do is provide a snapshot and a look forward at what the opportunities that we see in the state. And so in some ways, we may be a little different than other agencies because we're going to continually evaluate the opportunities that are in front of us as a state from an economic development perspective, look at the opportunities that are coming at us because of the industries. And we want to always be in a position where we're showing and looking ahead at the opportunities and providing you an idea of what that might take in terms of the investment required. And I know that can be a little bit tough on budgeting sometimes, but we feel like it's a good way for us to show you what's ahead of us and make sure that we're also being good stewards of that state money and being smart there. So as we walk through this, I want to just take a quick look at the BRC program in itself and walk you through that because that's where that $30 million request would live. So the Business Ready Communities Program, or BRC as it's known, is probably pretty familiar to all of you. It's been in existence since around 2002, and we've been making investments with that since 2003, I believe, was the first investments that hit the state. And I think the key here is to understand that these are not investments in a company per se. I think a lot of times people think that economic development, the way it works is that a state attracts a business, gives them some money, and then that business thrives with that money. In the state of Wyoming, we don't do that. We build community assets that are utilized in a community that help the business community, but are not owned by that business until there is some sort of transaction at a later date. And I think what's important about it to know is that this program with the BRC is a program that is actually in some ways the darling of economic development, even in the nation, because a lot of the states that we compete with, sure, they can throw money at a company, but one of the things that they don't always do that we can do is they don't necessarily build that local capacity in the way that we can. And I think that that's going to be shown in some of my examples today, that the BRC program is a really powerful program when used correctly. And over the last 2.5 years, we have been very, very laser focused on projects that are not just good for the community and good community type projects, but that really look at creating good jobs that make the economy in that community thrive, that remove barriers to growth. And I think the other part that's really important is we want to build economic development capacity, so that when that dollar goes into that community to build that asset, that it's then reused again and again for economic development purposes, and it doesn't really go away. It really is an investment. So you'll notice that the funding over time has has been a little bit of well, it might look a little bit like the Tetons, I guess. But ultimately you'll see that over the last few years, it's gone down. And the thing that you'll also see in this presentation is that our opportunities have increased pretty dramatically. I don't think it's hard to look around the state and not see some really big opportunities in front of us. And the BRC program is one of those programs that can help the state take advantage of those opportunities. But the reason I wanted to make sure that you all see this idea that the funding has gone down is that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. And I don't know if you hear that very often, but sometimes when your budget goes down, you become a lot more focused on what's important. And I think the message was received by us loud and clear that we need to be focused on ROI for the state. We need to be focused on creating good jobs, and we need to be focused on creating assets in a community that it's going to ultimately pay the state back over time. And so that's what we've done. We've said no to about $21 million worth of projects in the last 2.5 years. And I think that might be some sort of a record. It hasn't made us very popular in some areas, but our job was not to be popular. It was to make sure we're being great stewards of that money and showing that we can make good investments. Now, I also want to let you know that that's not going to change with more funding. That laser focus on jobs, removing barriers to growth, creating that economic development engine within a community, that's not going to change with more money. In fact, it's going to continue to be laser focused. So the types of projects we see and the types of projects we ultimately push forward are going to still remain very laser focused on those elements, regardless of our funding. So to illustrate the opportunities that are out in front of us and that the reason for our request, I thought I would take just a moment and walk through 3 different buckets of opportunities. And we've grouped them like this, really just to show you the different examples and to let you know that over the course of the last, for sure over the last 20 years, but with a special focus in the last 2.5 years, we've been looking at opportunities that are out in our communities, and we've been trying to forecast what our needs would be based on those opportunities. And so we've put them into 3 different buckets. And the first bucket is really, those are the known projects. Those are projects that have been developed over the course of the last few years that are in our communities and that we have worked closely with the community to know kind of that scope, schedule, and budget. So we feel really pretty solid about these particular opportunities. And we keep these all in a spreadsheet, and we're able to kind of filter and sort those so that we can really kind of take a look at what opportunities are out there and where they fit. So that's that first bucket. The second bucket, these are things that are maybe not as certain, but they're based on an outgoing or a proactive approach by our team. And so I'm going to highlight 3 things in particular. One of those things is what we call a site selection. It's really like us taking a look at all of the industrial sites that are possible around the state and having a site selection consultant come in and talk to us about those sites so that they can decide these sites are actually things that you could put money into and would be attractive to businesses looking to relocate. So that's one of the areas. The other area is in some of our energy projects that are happening and around the state, and to be part of that. And then finally, the other area of that is what we call pathways to prosperity, where we're developing 6 work streams where we're proactively looking at the constraints to growth in Wyoming. So that could be anywhere from housing to fiscal policies to economic development activities. And how do we make sure that we're funding those appropriately? So those are not quite as sure, but we have some estimates in those as well. And then finally, there's the third bucket, or what we call big fish opportunities. And I'll tell you right now, this one is it could be the most exciting, but it's also the most unknown. And one of the projects that I'll be demonstrating in the next few slides really kind of speaks to this, but these are projects that happen fast. So these aren't the types of projects that maybe take 2 or 3 years to develop. These are projects that happen really, really rapidly, and they happen at the speed of business, we'll call it. And so these are businesses who are either looking to expand in the state, move away from the state, or move to the state. And we need to be able to act very rapidly. Now, with all of these buckets, one of the things that we do know as well is that the cost of construction and the cost of managing these projects has gone up over the last few years. I think there's some data in the budget that we pulled from the construction industry that show that. We do have some projects in flight right now, and we've had to work through those particular projects to make sure that they get completed, even though costs have risen. So I want to address that because they're not part of this particular proposal. They're not part of these different projects, but we've been working through two of those projects right now. One came back to us and was able to get a business ready communities loan. And another is now continuing to work on the value engineering and make sure that project gets done. So let's take a deeper dive into each of these buckets. And I want to demonstrate the examples of these types of projects. So many of you have probably experienced some business ready community projects in your areas. And so I want to just take a deep dive into a few to demonstrate that we are really looking at those that provide an ROI back into the community and to the state. And so I'm going to take an example from way back in 2006 when we built a building, a 62,000 square foot building in Evanston, and that was utilized for a recruiting effort. The company that was there was a company that did like corrugated cardboard packaging, and I believe they were called a graphics company, and they were there for a number of years, utilized that building. And during that time, they paid a lease to the community because that's how the Business Ready Communities program works. Now those lease revenues were utilized obviously to maintain and operate the building, but they were also used to fund other projects in the community. So a lot of times we'll think, oh, well, the state hasn't funded it. Who could? Well, utilizing a state asset like this and having those lease revenues come in has allowed Evanston to generate and put $1.4 million back into the community, into projects that we didn't have to see in that way. And so what they've kind of created is this perpetual motion machine of money to continue to do economic development. And I think it's just a really good opportunity to understand how that money continue to circulate and how it can continue to grow within the community. 3 different businesses have utilized this to employ members of their community, as well as, again, continue to fund their economic development operations. Then the next example is that in that bucket 2, I mentioned this whole idea of site selection consultants, and that's one of the areas that we're looking to fund. So in this example, I just want to touch on this whole game of site selection, because I think a lot of times we think, well, gosh, they could see it on Google Earth. I'm sure they can find it and want to put their building there. Well, that's not really how it works. So if you're a company that is looking to expand its operations and perhaps put in a distribution center or a data center or expand their manufacturing operations, and you're a large organization, you engage with what's called a site selector. And those site selectors scour the entire nation for eligible industrial sites. And they are looking for a very easy place to put that manufacturing or distribution or data center or what have you. And they're looking for a place that will be ready to go immediately. They don't want to find a big bare patch of land that needs 1.5 years and a bunch of money to put into it, because that slows the deal down and it takes money away from their customer. So their goal is to do that really quickly. Well, in Wyoming, we've taken a look at 15 different sites across the state. We've analyzed what it would take for those sites to be what we call site selector ready, because ultimately those site selectors, they're looking at a big spreadsheet and they're looking at, how do I kick sites out of this spreadsheet so that I can give my customer 5 candidate areas to go look at? Well, unfortunately for the state of Wyoming, in a lot of cases, we don't make the cut because we're just not there in basic infrastructure at these sites. Now, it's a bit of a risk sometimes when you put money into an industrial site, because I don't know if you guys have heard of the Field of Dreams stuff. Well, I'll just bring it up, right? It's not one of those things where if you build it, they will come. And so we're looking at 15 sites. We're trying to analyze what it will take to get those sites ready to be eligible for site selectors. But we're only estimating that 5 of those sites would get an investment that we could make and get them ready for it. Because we also don't want to just spread it around. We want to make sure that we're targeted with our money and that we're making the best decisions based on the economic factors in those communities and within those sites. So I'll give you an example. If you jump to the next page, you'll see an example of the Sheridan High Tech Business Park over the last few years. And I think it's pretty telling what can happen when you're ready to go. Now, this is a model that we would like to continue. We would like to have a park that's ready to go, fill it up with great, in this case, it was manufacturing type jobs. And we've got a manufacturing cluster now with over 400 jobs in the community. And I think it can grow really, really quickly. And now what it does is that clustering effect gives those folks that are looking for a job, it gives them the opportunity to move around and gives them mobility. And so you think to yourself, why is the head of our economic development agency worried so much about one person and their job? Well, ultimately it comes down to that, because we want to be able to import know-how or create know-how in Wyoming. But if you only have one place in town to work, it gets pretty tough. And so we want to be able to provide that mobility for employees. And I think that this clustering effect is what we're really going for. And this is a good example. But again, you can't just have a bare patch of dirt to do that. You've got to have the infrastructure ready to go, and you've got to make it attractive for those companies. The next example I'd like to show you to demonstrate the third bucket. And these are those big fish opportunities. They happen really, really fast. You've got to be ready to go. And to do so, you've got to have some money to make an investment. And so this is an example in the city of Laramie, where a business that actually started as an idea at the university and began the business there. It utilized the Impact 307 or Wyoming Technology Business Center incubator at the time, became a business, employs between 70 and 80 people in Laramie today, and now has operations in Compton, California, San Francisco, and has looking at a farm has announced a farm in Virginia as an expansion. So this is a really big success story. And the beautiful thing about success stories is they're really, really good, but they also draw a lot of attention. And so this organization was approached by 2 other states, and those 2 other states said, "Hey, we would love to have you come to our states and build your research and development center and expand it, take it out of Laramie and move it to Virginia or Michigan." And well, they have a board of directors that has a fiduciary responsibility, and so they have to entertain those opportunities. And so we have been working with them for a number of years. The folks in Laramie have, as well as us. And so we were able to talk with them to look at how we could utilize the structure of business ready communities in order to keep them here and expand their R&D operations from that 70 to 80 people to 200. And so a number of folks went out and took a look at their operations in San Francisco and Compton. And then we also took a look at their operations in Laramie and said, how could the state partner to keep them here, keep them growing, and really hope to develop a cluster for what looks to be the future of agriculture in a certain, I guess, certain plants. And so we were able to, from the April timeframe to the August timeframe is when this occurred. So 4 months, really, this occurred, where we put a deal together, got it in front of their board of directors, in front of our board of directors. Everybody said, this is the type of deal we want to do. The payback to the community and the state is a little over $5 million per year. And so there's a really good return. And the other thing that it does is it gives us an opportunity to employ our UW graduates and those folks from community colleges, as well as the folks in Laramie, and again, develop that cluster. It happens so fast, and those other states, well, the way I kind of look at it is they don't really play the same game we're playing. And you could say it as, well, they don't play fair, but they're just playing the game. And we were able to, and we're continuing to be able to play this with the business ready communities. And the beautiful thing is that we're taking this investment and we're still protecting the state, because we're not giving them money. We're developing an asset in that community. And so we're not going to, even if they were to pick up and move, which they likely won't, we still have that asset. We still have that money in the state, and we can still use it. So these three different buckets, I think, demonstrate not just our laser focus on what's happening, but I want you to kind of understand that these three different buckets represent a very known quantity in revenue or in money that we need to make investments, a semi-unknown quantity, and then those things that we just don't want to miss. We don't want to be in a spot where a company that is born and grown here ends up leaving the state. It sounds like another thing that we talk about a lot here with our kids. And so I wanted to kind of give you like a little bit of a balance sheet here and tell you what's currently in the BRC fund. So we have carried over about $33 million. And then we got an appropriation in 23-24 of $24 million. So that was our fund at the time. And then we have since recommended projects that will be seen by the State Loan and Investment Board in February of $21 million. So that leaves us with about $37 million for 18 months. And
Mr. Co-Chair.
yeah,
Please, go ahead.
So where's the 20 million on Project Jupiter fall into this? Or is it not reflected on here?
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Co-Chair, it is reflected. It's actually in the board recommended
Okay,
bucket. Yep.
All
So it has already been recommended.
thank you.
Thanks for that question. And so you can see we have about $37 million left, assuming that everything goes right in February, which I hope it will. But then you can see that in terms of the opportunities that we have, if we go down through that list of various buckets, you can see that in the known BRC projects, in that bucket alone, we have 37 million. But I want to talk about that number for a minute because that's not just everything. We didn't just throw the kitchen sink into this bucket. This bucket, if we take the kitchen sink approach, is about $105 million of projects that we're tracking in our communities right now. But we took a factor of things that are very far along, that are very certain. And then we did a final pass for what our board would likely recommend. Now, of course, we don't know that. That's why we have a board of directors. They can work through that with us. But we have some pretty good data over the last 2.5 years that says what types of projects will make it through. And that comes to about $37 million in projects that will come through that look a lot like that. How do we put the money into the community and have it continue to circulate and continue to make that economic impact? In that next bucket, our estimates are a little less than $60 million. And then that number three, that number is greater than zero, but we don't know what it is. And we need to be able to approach those projects. We need to be able to move on those projects, and we need to be able to win in those cases. And so we're going to continue to be very, very careful with our money, because as you can see, as it stands today, if we stay with $37 million, we're going to make some really hard decisions. That's what we'll do. But if it ends up being $67 million, we'll make some really hard decisions, and we're going to continue to do that. I'll definitely stand for questions on not just the BRC element, but other elements of our budget. But I just wanted to make sure that we were able to kind of demonstrate the need and the opportunity out there, because I think a lot of times we talk about these opportunities, we talk about the big things that are happening in our state, but it's really important for us to quantify our ability to go after those opportunities and make sure that we're ready to go when those things happen. Thank you.
Go ahead. Please, Coach.
Thank you, Josh. When you appeared here last, you said you should congratulate us most on not what we said yes to, but what we said no to. And that's a lot of those, you were responding to the criticism and the governor's direction that WBC became known as just another sort of MRG, go down there and get your water and sewer grant. And you've focused like a laser, but before we be too dismissive of water and sewer grants, the Sheridan High Tech Park was built on water and sewer grants. So I want to be careful about that. So I distinguish between a little town saying, gee, if we repair this line, you know, we think we can get jobs. What I did is I took infrastructure and traded a well-heeled developer acreage for infrastructure. And that's the land that we had for the business park. So I don't want to be too dismissive of water and sewer projects.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to pretend that was a question, and it was, would you agree? Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, that's actually a really good point. And so we're definitely not dismissive. The examples that I've used did tend to focus on kind of bookended by businesses. But I want to let you know that that really exciting stuff like water and sewer, we still play that game a lot. In fact, we think that that's a way to unlock economic potential. But the key there is what you mentioned, that we don't want to just do that because we feel bad or because we think it's their turn or anything like that. We're doing it because it will unlock that economic potential. And that's part of the rigor that we take in our process of looking at these opportunities. So I'm glad you clarified that, because in the right instance, that's exactly the tool we would use to unlock that economic potential.
Thank you. Follow on, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
So go back to Project Jupiter, where you had a 4-month turnaround, and tell me what happened, because I think, I don't know that you were on board yet. We had a great opportunity for a company we lost to Texas. And I had to tell them, well, here's the way it works, unfortunately. Get your application in, it's a quarter to consider it. Next quarter, the Business Council Board takes a look at it. The next quarter, the SLIB takes a look at it. They went to some board in Texas. They make a decision in 3 weeks, have a budget way bigger than yours. And in addition to bricks and mortar, they threw tax rebates and everything else at them. But time is money in business. What have you changed now to get off of that attenuated, it's going to take a year to get you the money cycle?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, that's a good question. And I think one of the benefits that we had in this case is that this company already exists in Wyoming. So we had that information very quickly. We also knew, we were also able to deduce the things that matter to them. So if you think about it, we were able to figure out in April what it was going to take to keep them and what the deals might have looked like in those other states. Well, we can put the deal together and bring it in front of our board in a quarter, right? So we can do that work. The timing happened to work out with their board of directors as well, because their board of directors was making the decision between the 3 locations based on the deals we put together. Does that answer your question? So I guess what I'm saying is
Mr. Chairman. No, I was hoping you were saying we don't have to work quarter to quarter to quarter to quarter. If we've got a hot opportunity that we can get our board together and we can get SLIB together and we can move this thing through the pipeline quickly. That's what happened with Weatherby. We had a governor that wanted that project, and boom, we weren't working quarter to quarter anymore.
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Co-Chair, I missed that. So we can hold a special board meeting at any time. We have the ability to pull a board together, and with 24 hours notice, public notice, we can hold a board meeting to analyze the deal. So the answer is yes, we can move really quickly. In this case, it just happened, the timing happened to work out.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I know you can move quickly. Is it a standard part of your operating procedure now to do so?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman.
please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation, Josh, and all your continued work in this area. It's really helpful for our state. Thank you. So I want to make sure I understand bucket number 2. You mentioned that you had looked at, was it 15 projects maybe, or 15? And then you thought that maybe at the end of the day, there were more like 5 that might be realistic. Is that represented in that 59.5? If you went and built out those specific projects?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, and Representative Kinner, yes, sir, it is. It's represented in that $59,500,000 number.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure I had it right the first time. Thank you.
Okay. Further questions, please proceed. Anything, Josh?
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Co-Chair, but my presentation in terms of our budget and really where we wanted to focus, that concludes that. You'll probably notice that we did have some other requests, and I have 2 other things I just want to bring to your attention. There might have been some question around personnel and are we going to be able to take this extra money and be able to do something with it without any additional personnel, and the processes that we've developed and the things that we've been doing over the last, 20 years have made it so that we can do that. However, the project management role could be useful in broadband as well. But again, those were not recommended. So I don't think we need to belabor that. I feel comfortable with the team that we have in being able to execute on this, the BRC at whether it's 27 million or whether it's 37 million or 67 million. The other thing I did want to bring up to this body and other bodies is that there's another element besides money that we want from the legislature, of course. And I think that comes with a little bit of leadership and a little bit of cover when we make those hard decisions. Because when we don't recommend funding on a particular project, we're not necessarily saying it's a bad project. We're just saying that it doesn't fit our mission and our scope. And it doesn't fit that focus of ROI that we've been really working hard to establish. And so one of the things that I think can be helped in a way is an understanding that we're not going to be able to do those projects that we might have been able to do in the past. And I think help our communities, help our legislators, help our folks know that we're going to have to continue to say no, because that's not going to get any easier, even if we have more budget. In fact, it might get even a little bit more difficult. And so I think that that's an element that I would really welcome and appreciate. And I know I'm already getting that, but I want to continue that. So thank you.
Senator Salazar, please pull that mic closer a little bit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to give kudos to one of your folks in Fremont, Patrick Edwards. Really squared away. And I've noticed he's really engaged in the community. And so I just wanted to pass that along. So thank you.
So Josh, how many employees do you have now total?
Mr. Chairman, we have 39 employees right now. We're at 34.
Further questions for Josh? Vice Chair, you look like you're. All right.
Mr. Chairman,
Oh, go ahead, Mike.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, 1 second. Senator Guerrero.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Josh, how are you? The governor talked a little bit about this today and you talked about it too, about not just being about new business, but about, expanding current businesses. One of the vexing problems in our community these days, with land values going up so much, a lot of businesses, industrial type businesses, are getting forced out of the community. And they're looking to go to other communities in Wyoming, like North Lincoln County, Sublette County, because land values are cheaper and they can go, but they run into the problem that you're talking about. So with BRC, how would your board view a BRC project in another community where you're really not generating any new projects, but you're relocating current projects, which may expand if they relocate?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, and Senator Guru, that's a really good question. And so I think what we would do in that case is that we don't want to pit one town versus another. We actually experienced this at a federal level where one business was looking to move from one state to another, and the Fed said, well, we're about to step out of this and not help because we're not going to pit one state versus another. So we would do the same thing with communities. And I think the first thing that we would do is have that open dialogue to say, what are the constraints to growth in a particular community? Could those be fixed by anything that we can do? And how do we help facilitate that particular part? One of the things that I think does get confusing is that we're seen as the place that has these BRC grants and loans and the large loan program, but we also have much of our team is comprised of folks who are facilitators. They provide a service to the communities to try to understand what those problems are and how do we solve them. And a lot of times it's not money that solves those. And so that would be the way we would look at it. It would be really difficult to get a project through where we were pitting those two against each other, unless the one community said, please take them. Right. So I think that's a question that we would definitely ask. Thank you.
Go ahead, Representative.
Mr. Chairman, Josh, to skip it to your supplemental budget request, you had a number of positions that you had requested. The governor's office's governor's recommended denial. And so I guess my question is, in 60 seconds, why do you think we should reject the governor's recommendation and hire these positions anyway?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Stiff, thanks for putting me in the hot seat there. And So let me see if I can take 59 seconds and avoid that question. And then, part of that might be the lack of tenure of the director of the Wyoming Business Council and not understanding a supplemental budget request as well. Let's just say that. But, I don't have the full purview that the governor has. But what I can tell you is that, the governor has been very, I think, generous to us in the way he's approaching economic development. And so the one area, though, that we do need a little bit of help is in project management. And that's something that we could utilize immediately on not just our own programs, but also the federal money that's coming at us. And so I've probably gone over 60 seconds, but that's an area that we definitely need. As I mentioned at the very beginning, I'm probably always going to come in front of this board and tell you what our needs are, just so that even if you tell me no, but that we can get a better understanding of what we're going through, and then we can work as that team to see what's happening and be more read in over time. So that was part of my intent as well as the lack of experience. But that project management role could be really key for broadband as well as BRC.
So Josh, we've been bouncing around the idea of creating a large scale industrial park someplace in Wyoming. I think it was 10 years ago or 8 years ago, we flew up to Canada and toured their business park up there. That was just remarkable. And you look at your handout, you've got, basically the McMurray Business Park down here south of town. That's that photograph. And he created that one, and he also created the one outside of Casper. Where would you put one? I mean, where's the next best place or the needed place? I mean, I'm thinking it would be Southwest Wyoming in all likelihood, just for business growth. You take the hydrogen, you take the uranium concepts of it. But I think, do you have locations in mind, and do you have infrastructure and ready to go? I mean, I think what we'd like to see is a project getting developed that we can say, yeah, we're going to pay for that. And this is what we want to look at. You tell us what the infrastructure model looks like and how it has to be funded. I mean, I'd love to have it in Cheyenne, but we've already got 2 or 3 of them. And the question is, where's the next need and most important place to do it? So what's your 2 cents on that?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thought that if I was going to be on the hot seat where I was picking things like, saying why the governor was wrong, I didn't, and then picking the areas of the state. This is like the greatest problem ever, because these are like, what would you do if you could do it? But they're also like rock and a hard place questions, because now I got to pick. But and all jokes aside, I would look at Southwest Wyoming and I'd look at Northeast Wyoming, because those 2 areas have a lot of what an industrial park could utilize in terms of not just workforce, but opportunity. If you look at the activity that's going on in those areas, especially in the Southwest, there's a lot. There's almost 6,000 net new jobs happening and then it's just sort of a back of the napkin calculation in Southwest Wyoming in the next 5 to 10 years. Well, that's huge. And that's a great area.
And where we need to tie it into, we already know there's going to be an expanded soda ash group. We already know that there's going to be a small nuclear site. We already know that a hydrocarbon or hydrogen hub may be in that general vicinity. If you want money from us, where we jump up and down and say, we'll give you as much as we can, I think we need a plan of what you want to do down there and how you're going to implement it. And, that's tied with community support and locations and properties and show us a vision but we need to see meat and potatoes.
Mr. Chairman, understood. Thank you.
Chairman,
Go ahead.
as a follow-on to that, I didn't get into it in the governor's comments, but he was talking about the Natrium project and the grid issues and the right-of-way issues. But if it gets hung up, it's because these little communities don't have the wherewithal or the financial depth just to put water and sewer in necessary to support the thing. And it may be that you have to reach out to them and help them engage. I don't know who's the planning, who's the driving, maybe it's somebody else in the great whip engine that's doing that, but I worry about it failing for something that's far simpler and humbler than just right of way. Isn't that what you're talking about? Some of those kinds of concerns?
Well, That, but you know, these are large scale projects, and we can help the small communities do what they need to do through water and sewer, but a large industrial park is a 100-acre, 200-acre program where you divide it up and you build it on the prospect that they will come. But you do it where the best odds are. And, you know, if we do little ones here and there, that's nice, but the big ones are the ones where we really can make a significant financial impact to the whole southwestern quarter of the state. Or, you know, up in the Bighorn Basin area. I mean, but it's the real deal. It's thinking big and acting big.
And Mr. Co-Chair and Josh, I just engage in the colloquy that, you know, so you're asking for a little bit of a change in what they've done. I was always told business council is not going to come in and make a plan for you. You have to have people in your community that really want to see something happen, and then they can help bring the resources. This is a different thing, you know, because it doesn't work unless the local community steps up and says, hey, we really want this. They can't pick the community and then wait for the community to embrace it. I don't know if that works.
Well, these large scale projects, basically, I think have to be either by a multi-billionaire, or it has to be the state that has the backbone that puts all of those things together and finds the property and just takes the leap. And it's one of the things, like I say, we've been talking about this for over 10 years. One or two of these large industrial complex type situations. And I think it's ripe for the pickings right now if we do that. So, or at least develop the plan and let us help.
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Co-Chair, I think that in some way fits in bucket 2. So bucket 2 is that proactive approach. And we're not doing that in a vacuum, though. We are definitely engaged with the community, definitely engaged with the industry to do that. And that's where you see that $59,500,000 number is built into some of the industrial parks, but also some focusing in on some of those technologies where we can partner, not just on our own, but partner with the Department of Energy, for example, some of the industrial partners that are there that might want to do direct air capture or hydrogen. We can be a part of it with the Business Ready Communities program. And I think that's the beautiful thing about it, is that the vehicle's there. It doesn't require dramatic changes or anything in statute or anything like that. We have the vehicle to do it. And that's what that bucket 2 represents is us making some strategic bets and looking at the communities that are staged for growth, the industries that are already making investments and kind of unlocking that with some money. We don't have to be the sole funder. In fact, we don't want to be the sole funder. That's not the way it works best. But if we can play a role in that, and that's where that bucket 2 is the more of the proactive approach. So it's a bit of a change, I would say, but it represents, I think, a direction that the Business Council needs to go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess since we're, picking points in Wyoming out, we actually do have a billionaire in Du Bois who's built an incredible museum. And, that the spillover from Teton County is coming now pretty forcefully into Fremont in Du Bois. So take a look at it. Take a look at it. It's a pretty place.
Yep. Okay. Any further questions for Josh? Oh, please. Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hopefully this maybe circles back around. But Josh, I really want to help you continue to plant the seed about the critical role that your staff plays in helping communities be laser focused in developing their projects. So that includes scope and budget. Can you talk to us about that important role that your regionals, who are amazing regional directors, play in helping communities prepare for these applications? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Sherwood, I'd be happy to. So we have 6 regions of the state that our team of regional directors covers. And as Senator Salazar mentioned, Patrick is one of those that is really, really good. We're very fortunate to have him, and we have 5 others that are equally as good. We'll let those folks duke it out as to who's the best. But the regional directors play that role of really a community liaison and a facilitator, as well as understanding not just our programs so that they can see how they fit, but they also play that role of who else needs to be connected with in the state. And they play that role of connector a lot. And I think that role of connector is sometimes is not really well understood, or it's not appreciated. But one of the things that makes Wyoming so business friendly is our ability to reach out and connect with people quickly and be able to get answers to communities or to businesses as fast as possible. And our regional directors are at the forefront of that. They're covering a lot of territory, but I think they do it pretty well, and they focus in where they have to do that. So thanks for the question. Hopefully it answered it.
Okay, further questions?
Chairman,
Please.
nothing for Josh. I just want to offer a little editorial comment, which is a kudos to the Laramie County and the Cheyenne community. And I know you've been a part of this because you're a huge booster. When I became mayor of Sheridan, the first thing I did was drive down here. And I interviewed the mayor. I interviewed the head of Cheyenne Leads. I interviewed a number of commercial realtors. And the premise is I'm conservative. I don't necessarily want to be building business parks. Wouldn't I be competing with commercial developers? And the one said, well, the fallout from government helping facilitate this is everybody does better. And he said, I think the initial project, this is the way I recall it, Bob, and you could correct me, it was 100 acres that they put the infrastructure to, and it took 10 years to land that first distribution center. And this developer looked at me and he said, Mr. Mayor, if you've got somebody in your community that's got deep pockets enough to hold on to 100 acres and put the infrastructure in and work for 10 years to get somebody in it, there's no role for the city. But I would tell people in Sheridan who are jealous of Cheyenne, I'd say, Cheyenne's got a 20-year jump on us. It doesn't happen overnight. And so I just want to give my recognition to, you're just one of many that have helped make that happen in Cheyenne, and kudos to you for that.
Okay, anything further? Josh, thank you. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Godspeed. Happy Merry Christmas.
I didn't get credit for something.
Oh, a little bit.
There's Nicholas fingerprints all over that stuff. No, you were too early on in your career to be active.
Oh, I was that.
Yeah.
Different components of it. And the expansions.
Well, let's see what happens. That's what I tell you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is David Swindell. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Retirement System. I have with me several members of my staff. I've got Mike Bleakley at the end, the Deputy Director, our Chief Investment Officer, Sam Masudi, in backup, our General Counsel, Ben Brandis, and from our Volunteer Retirement Board, we had the Vice Chair, Lanny Applegate. Thanks, Lanny, for being here. And on the Zoom, I have our main board chairman, Tom Chapman, who is, he injured himself and is unable to be present. He's can't even walk down the stairs.
Tom, we want to see you jump up and do a few calisthenics while we're
I was going to say, I can show you a pretty massive brace. So,
Mr. Chairman, I noted with A&I, you asked Tricia to give a brief laydown of the purpose of the agency and just real quick, kind of, what that agency was all about. Would you like me to do the same?
Please.
And as I do that, I noticed there's a few new faces around the dais. Members, Senator Salazar, Senator Anderson, Representative Zwanzer, right? And Representative Sherwood. Representative Henderson, yes.
So now you know their names better than we do.
Yeah, that's right. So welcome to the committee. You should know that the Joint Appropriations Committee is the home committee for the retirement system, an arrangement that's been in place for some time and that's been, I think, mutually beneficial to the legislature and to the agency. But very briefly, we're agency 72 for the Wyoming retirement system. We have 34,000 pensioners and 41,000 active contributing members. We have more than 10 billion assets under management. The state of Wyoming, the state employees, are only about 24% of the total system. The largest employer is K through 12 with almost 18,000 members. We have all of the higher education, cities, towns, and counties, almost all of the public employees throughout the state. So that's one thing that everyone should understand. It's more than just state employees. It's mostly local. Last year, we paid out $739 million in benefits, and 78% of that, almost $600 million, stayed within the state of Wyoming. This is a material payroll in a lot of areas. Representative Larson, Senator Salazar, we're in Fremont County, where the three of us are from, because I'm a graduate of Riverton High School. That's about 3% of county income. That makes the retirement system one of the bigger payrolls in the county. I mean, it's material in a lot of ways. In addition, we also are the plan sponsor of a deferred compensation retirement savings program under 457B of the IRS code. We have almost $1 billion under management there with 26,000 accounts. We do all of this with 44 state employees, 2 summer interns, and a couple of direct bill people from ETS. Our administrative costs are low amongst our peers, about 7 basis points of assets versus 10.8% for peer systems, or almost 30% cheaper. The low headcount is an advantage, but it's also an issue. The Funston report, which was commissioned by the board as an operational review several years ago, noted that overall staffing in the non-investment area is among the lowest in this peer group of 7 state and local systems and below median in nearly every functional area, and in particular, finance and accounting, which is the lowest that they had seen. Our admin budget is about $9.9 million a year, about $20 million for the biennium. In a $10 billion portfolio, Sam's investment portfolio moves by more than that in a given day. That's why we come to you with a supplemental request, which is the topic of this hearing. We are seeking to add 1 CPA accountant and 1 investment analyst in the 2023 supplemental. The retirement system doesn't usually have a supplemental request. I really shouldn't be here. But, and these are not new requests. Members of the committee that have been here before, you've seen both of these requests before. And the retirement board wants to bring them again because we will be polite, but we will be persistent. In the view of the board, we need both of these positions to meet our fiduciary standards and to reduce operational risk for mission execution and mission excellence within the system. Okay, that's what we do, and that's why we're here. With that, I think I would like to turn it over to our board chair, Tom Chapman, who has some remarks from the board's perspective. Tom?
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, members of the committee, and welcome to the new committee members. Look forward to working with you. As I'm always told in these meetings, is be as brief as possible. So I'm going to try to be as brief as I can. Retirement's in good shape. I think that Dave and the team have done an incredibly great job under difficult circumstances. At a time when a work environment, we see 50% turnover in jobs, We've had so many folks in the retirement system stepping up and taking on bigger responsibilities. I also want to thank our legislative liaisons who have been working hard with us to navigate a pretty tough environment to get some things done like Fire A and performance comp. And then I wanted to also quickly mention our board. We have a really great board. We have individuals that have managed close to $1 trillion in assets, as well as had incredible private industry experience. And so just so people know, we've had over 30 committee meetings between our board meetings. And so it is probably one of the most motivated boards that certainly I've been with in my history with retirement. So as Dave mentioned, kind of why are we here? And it's talking about the investment team effectively. For the new folks, investment returns provide over 70% of our Wyoming pension benefits. So it's critically important. One of the things that I'm happy to say, and I know for the folks that have heard this before, I'm also happy to repeat it again, is we've had some of the best returns in the country. In 2017, our 5-year returns were ranked in the lowest quartile in the country. Today, as of September, our 5-year returns are in the top quartile. And for those of you wondering, given the markets have been really tough in this year to date for 2022, we're close to the top 10% in the country year to date on returns. So the question is, why do we need more folks if we're doing so well? Well, as Dave mentioned, we are definitely very inadequately staffed for an investment operation our size. My background is in finance, in hedge funds and private equity. And generally, when we added a front office person, we always used to add 2 back office folks. So when we talk about accounting and we only have 1 CPA and 1 finance specialist, we have huge key man risk. We have much smaller staffing sizes relative to our peers. And most concerning, it's a concern to our auditors. On the investment analyst side, the original investment org chart that we presented years ago showed 3 senior investment officers and 3 junior analysts supporting those senior officers. We've had to convert one of those positions into an accounting position, again, pressed by our auditors. So the problem is we have 1 investment analyst covering effectively the workload for 3. And the issue with that is our senior investment officers then have to do a lot of work that, frankly, we're paying them too much money to do. And so we do feel that there's an opportunity cost associated, and again, creates a key man risk. It most importantly, in my opinion, creates a massive succession risk. So in summarizing, both of these positions, to me, will ensure that the investment operations can continue to be one of the best in the country. And for the new folks, I would also mention, because the retirement system is not general funded, I think that frankly, and we as a board, as a system, feel that by continuing to support our investment operations will help our funding ratio, which is clearly great for the state of Wyoming. So with that, I want to thank you all for letting me make a few comments. And Dave, I will pass it back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have lots of supervision, and I need it. I think I'll stand for questions. I think the case is well stated for just an additional accountant and an additional investment analyst. I think the write-ups are pretty good in your budget book. I'll stand for questions.
Well, why don't you just run through the size of your portfolio? Because it's changed quite a bit in the last 10 years. And theoretically, that would impact the quality of work you do compared to the number of personnel you had before. I think that, plus it's just nice to hear the numbers.
I think I'll make a comment on the accounting side, and then I'll turn it over to Sam, and he's best qualified to talk about the history. He's been our chief investment officer since 2013, and he has all this history. And so I'm going to poach that mind a little bit. But let me talk about the accounting a little bit, because remember, 2 positions, 1 CPA accountant and 1 investment analyst. One of the things that has happened in the accounting world is that there's an increase in the requirements. There's an organization called the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, or GASB, as it's called, and it sets the accounting standards for state and local governments. They issue statements, and they're numbered statements. GASB 67 and 68 was a major revision in pension accounting in the United States, and it came into effect in 2015.
The result of that is that the annual financial report from the Wyoming retirement system was greatly expanded and had additional tables, additional supplementary required information, all of which has to be generated and maintained by that single account. In addition, there is now a completely new report. This is the 68 report, and this is what every school district, every county, every city that publishes their own financial reports, including the state of Wyoming, has to rely upon and incorporate in their financial reports. Were we to be late or untimely or inaccurate with our reports, it would affect all of the reporting of all the financial entities in the state of Wyoming. And that's why it's critical that we don't take excessive operational risk in the accounting function. So the workload's gone up. It was externally imposed, but there we are. With regard to the investment portfolio, yes, it's a good news story. We all want small government, but we want a larger pension fund. And Sam's been overseeing that. So I'll turn it over to Sam for a few comments on the history of where we were and where we are, and maybe a little bit on current events.
Great, thank you. Mr. Chairman, yes, so we currently have about $10 billion in the defined benefit program and about 900 million in deferred comp. When I came in, pension was about 6 billion and deferred comp was about 350 million, I believe. So we've grown nicely, but right now the staff's a little stretched. And so I think by having another analyst, that'd be very helpful. And with only 2 analysts, if one departs, then it puts the other one under a lot of pressure, and potentially we have a little bit of a vicious cycle where it maybe puts pressure on other people and makes them more likely to want to move on. So.
And just so the committee knows, that there's a bill or a circulating that's going to, or I remember if it's a budget amendment, we're going to increase the idea is to increase the performance compensation for both the retirement and for the state treasurer's office for the investment team, because they're woefully underpaid for their profession, and we lose them on a regular basis, or will lose them if we don't at least continue to at least be remotely close to what the private industry pays them out. So, go ahead, Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chapman referenced succession risk based on this position, but what is your succession plan? I mean, it's hard to understand the risk if we don't have at least a general idea of what your succession planning is, Sam.
Right. So I think that the skill set of a senior investment officer is a bit different than that of a CIO. And typically the senior investment officers spend a greater portion of their time on investing. And I think our current senior investment officers prefer it that way. So as a general rule, we could either have an external hire or an internal hire. And right now, I think the senior investment officer would rather stay focused on investments. So it would be most likely an external person. I think the succession issue is also for all the other positions. So if senior people leave, ideally we have a mid-level person who can step into that role, or at the very least, an analyst who's very well informed and familiar with the portfolio.
With regard to succession planning for the accountant, the answer isn't a very good one, because if you only got one, and if you lose that person, there is no backup. So what we would do is we would poach the investment accountant that we created in the investment side, divert that person from reconciling the monthly manager statements into the custody bank, instead put them on emergency accounting work, seek to get a contract with a local firm to see if we couldn't get an accountant on an emergency basis to try to put together the financial statements. And then I'm going to go to church twice on Sundays.
Mr. Chair, can I make one comment?
Fire away.
Thank you. One of the things that I think we are trying to promote here in the state is we want people to come in at an entry level, teach them, work with them, so then they grow up into, higher positions. And I'll tell you, there is nothing more important than investments, because these folks that come in are generally, they're generalists in the investment world. They learn the fundamentals, they learn about the system, and then we want to be able to promote these folks within. And so that to me is why it's so important. And frankly, it's so much better when we're promoting within these, within our own systems rather than getting a lot of lateral. So I just think it's important if we think about longer term on how we're building our investment process.
Go ahead, Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On both of these positions, is the pay adequate to actually get some applications? Because I know we've had this discussion over the last year that you might have an accounting position open, but it stays open for an extended period, or an analyst position stays open an extended period because the pay is too low and no one wants to come to work. So is this going to be enough, or does it need to be more? And how did you arrive at this level of pay?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, great question. I believe the grade established in the supplemental request at grade 11 is adequate for this position. We work closely with A&I. We wanted it to be a qualified, certified public accountant. That's a licensed position. You're going to pay for that. But I think they graded it adequately, and we will see. All accounting positions are under stress throughout the state. We just don't produce a lot of accountants in Wyoming, but I believe we'll have a good shot. With regard to the investment analyst, the bill that Representative Nicholas mentioned will be very helpful. It'll authorize slightly higher base pay, and it also increases the participation in the performance comp from 25% of base to 35% of base, because it's specifically targeted to enhance the compensation of those junior people and try to hold them. So I also think those are positive moves. So I believe the compensation for both of these is adequate. And if we can get the authorization, we'll be able to recruit successfully.
Further questions? Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Dave, go ahead.
I just received an inquiry from one of our Senate colleagues it's just, you don't have to answer, just to send me a report. This is about the volunteer firefighters pension. And we diverted insurance premium from that to the Fire Plan A. And they're concerned about the actuarial soundness of the plan and what it might take to backfill that loss. And I think we had memos on that at the time. So maybe you can just send me something that we've already had so that we can take a look at that. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just to change gears a little bit, Director, and I've always made full disclosure that I'm a future pensioner on the large plan. But a couple of questions I have, and because this is the home committee, but let me walk through this one. On your write-up, you talk about future projected returns moving from 7 down to about 6.8%. Has that number been incorporated into the last actuarial estimates of the soundness of all of the accounts that all 5 or 6, 7 that you currently manage?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, the answer is yes. Those reports do incorporate the assumed rate of return of 6.8%. It's a long-term average. We won't get it every year, but they use 6.8. Back in the day, you don't have to go very far back. I think as far back as 2013, the system was at 8%. And so the board took it from 8 to 7.75, and then to 7, and then to 6.8. And all the most recent actuarial reports published reflect the 6.8 assumption.
All right, thank you. When I read the latest report that you send out every year to all the potential pensioners and all of the various funds, or the participants in the different ones, the one thing that highlighted to me that was a little disturbing, because this is the home committee, when I looked at the law enforcement pension fund, it specifically mentions in that report that something's got to be done, because for the last 5 years, this is moving away from actuarially soundness. And so I was just wondering, seeing how this is the home committee, when you were going to bring this to our attention, that we have a situation here where we're incurring a larger financial liability on the state stand, because this account is moving the opposite direction of everything we else have. And so when were we going to hear about this, and what's your recommendations on when we need to act to start to correct this issue?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, great questions. As we highlighted to you, the law enforcement plan is of concern. It It's exactly as you stated. It's at 86% funded right now. It will grow into the mid-90s in the projections. But these latest assumption changes are such that it never achieves 100%. And actually, when you get out to about 25 years or so, it actually backslides a little bit. And so it needs a rate increase. The board has taken this as part of their work. We at the November board meeting or the September board meeting, the actuaries presented a plan to the board of various ways to fix the fund, including contribution increases and benefit adjustments. And the board considered that. They gave some directions to the actuaries. And then we are going to engage in a collaborative discussion with all the stakeholders. As a reminder to the committee, the law enforcement plan is about 2,700 participants. It's about 74% local. It's mostly city police officers, deputy sheriffs, and the state is about only a quarter of the plan, and it's mostly correction officers. Game and fish wardens and the state troopers are in their separate plan. That's different. So this plan needs a rate increase, but could have some benefit modifications. You know, that tier 2, there's no tier 2 in law enforcement like there is in the public employee plan with a reduced benefit schedule. And we're going to discuss with the law enforcement community and the employers as to what they think of some of the options. Absent any other options, the actuaries are suggesting a 5% rate increase. That would take the total rate increase from 17.2% to 22.2%. That's a pretty substantial jump. You might get away with 4, but not really. Otherwise, you need to start messing with the normal retirement age. This is a public safety plan. It has a lower normal retirement age than other plans. It's designed that way. It's a feature. Employers use this. You can work for 20 years in the Department of Corrections and you can retire. You can draw a benefit. That's the design. Makes it an expensive plan. The normal cost of the plan is perilously close to that 17.2% contribution rate, which means it just doesn't have a lot of extra horsepower to gain on an unfunded liability. And in the future, as people live a little bit longer and the normal cost goes up just a little bit, it actually starts to backslide. So you're exactly right. And we intend to bring a proposal to the legislature for next year based upon those conversations. There's been some other conversations from some of the folks in the law enforcement community that maybe it's better to get on with this sooner. And there could be a proposal in this session, perhaps to do something sooner. If you put some one-time money into the plan, you might get away with a lower rate increase and thus reduce the future cost of government. But that's what we're looking at, and that's the situation with the plan. Stable for now, not an emergency, but yes, there's work to be done here.
Well, just to follow up on that. So, you know, from the appropriations standpoint for next year, what we would like to see is bring it to us in May or July at the latest, your plan, so that we can evaluate it and understand it. And then if we want to work tweaks on it, we have time to do it and do it in an educated fashion as opposed to having it put on our desk in December. Because we want to, ultimately, we're going to have to come up with the dollars and cents. So the sooner you have it in front of us, the more ability we will have to work with you and to find a way to get to where we need to be. So I was just, and so Tom, that's kind of my missive to you as well, so if that's possible. Because I think we all agree that we need to do something.
Well, Mr. Chairman, just to put a little finer point on that, what I'd like to see is actually a schedule as to when the actions that you talked about, the board's going to look, you're going to meet with the potential pensioners, when this stuff, because I am concerned that we'll be here next December and we're going to get this report. And I think this needs to be, I just tell you, the legislature is the one on the financial hook for this. As you know, one-time contribution doesn't sit very well with this committee, and particularly when that's your fiduciary responsibility to make sure that doesn't happen. But we got to infuse money into this thing. So the quicker that we have this conversation through the interim. So what I'd like to see is you present a schedule of things that when are going to happen so that we're having these discussions if it's going to take a legislative fix, because we're the guys that have to go out and say, you're increasing your contribution on your side. That needs to be a discussion that we participate in once you get the input long before the December markup. So if you could provide us with a schedule of when those activities would happen, and then we can work that into one of our regular interim appropriations committee later in the summer, early fall, that would be much, much preferred than waiting to the end.
And Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, members of the committee, absolutely reasonable, and we can do that. The work has been done. The actuaries have completed their work, and the board has now, they modified that a little bit. They took a couple of those options away. So they've had their spin on it. What we need now is just a little bit of time to work with the law enforcement community. We can bring this to you and have this for you in May, no problems.
Yeah, and I would suggest that you may, when you do bring it to us, you might want to have 2 or 3 options
We will.
so that we can see the ramifications and impacts and who pays for what. And then have an actuarial component to it on what options we take and who pays what and where we get. So.
Right.
So, Mr. Chairman, I have.
So I'd like to also, I heard you say 2 things. One is next year we may have, and that's what I'm hearing our chairman and vice president say is next year we'd really like to have the information. But I also heard you say there may be something this session that we bring forth. And I want to be careful that we don't get tangled up and trip over each other. So, you know, if you're, I'm thinking you're getting some direction here. That did I hear that incorrectly?
No, you heard it correctly. I'm just, the law enforcement community, we started those discussions. And so some of those folks have the same actuarial slides. And so they're putting their own noodles on. Just so you know. But our plan is to bring this to you in May for the next session.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative.
Mr. Chairman, Director Swindell, the governor's recommended a cost of living adjustment for retirees. My question just is actuarially, does it work? Clearly, we have an interest in not making the same mistake the legislature made 20 some years ago when it gave a cost of living adjustment to the Fire A pension retirees, which all ended in grief.
So before you answer that, if we dive into that barrel of monkeys, we'll be here another half an hour or more. And so, and I've been told that we're going to put that issue off until Wednesday next week.
So, Mr. Chairman, just one more question. Mr. Salmon, breakfast to you. Investment environment, the challenging investment environment. And we've seen a little bit of rebound, you know, which is very good, but now we're seeing a little bit of a sell-off. So are we going to have a net gain or a net loss on December 31st? Where are we at right now?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, if I knew that, I'd probably be on a yacht right now. But yeah, it's a great question. We're constantly following the market and doing research. I think that no matter how smart or thorough we are, there are always going to be unexpected events. So the market has been up or down. I think up and down. I think that one of the reasons the market's down is because interest rates have gone up. So when interest rates go up, value of everything else declines. That's the bad news. The good news is going forward, it increases the return potential. So a year ago, we would have said 6.8 might be difficult to hit. Right now, when the 10-year treasury is at 3.5%, all of a sudden it's much more likely. So right now, as of the end of November, the portfolio is down about 5.5%. But we're beating our benchmark by 1.8%. So that's about 180 million of additional value there. We can't control the markets, but we can control the relative performance. And you also, as Tom was mentioning, year to date, we're in the top 10 or 15% of our peer sets. We're doing the best we can with the markets and what they're doing.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that. And as somebody that dabbles myself, certainly I wish I could follow your level of returns over the last few years. But I just, the point that I want to draw is we potentially lost 4% out of the total of the corpus of the account. 6.8%, I hope, actually manifests itself over the next 5 years. Given the market, maybe it'll all be fixed income. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All right. Good job, guys. You can, obviously, it's a nice place to be. Just don't lose your seat yet. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Happy holidays to
Happy
everyone.
holidays. We'll see you. See you, Sam.
Thank you.
You want to do one more or you want to just take a quick break?
We're scheduled for a break. Let's break till 5 after 3. Get back there. We're a little bit ahead. of
Okay,
schedule.
we'll take a 10-minute break. We're a little ahead of schedule, but with any luck, we'll get done early. So. Okay, now we're with the Wyoming Energy Authority. Please proceed, Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I start, I'd like to introduce some people I've dragged along with me. My colleague, Jamie Blosmo, who runs the books for the Energy Authority. She'll be taking the hard questions. Also my colleague from the Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute, Director Whitman, who will be here to address any specifics around request number 2. Mr. Chairman, how would you like me to proceed? I have 2 requests and several questions from the chairs to get through. Would you prefer just to go through it all and then take questions, or?
Yeah, just give us a quick background particularly for the newer folks, and then just run right to your request.
Got it. Okay, so as background, our annual, on an annual basis, our appropriation amounts to $1.56 million. Of that, approximately 85% of 1.3 million is 900 series. We run just about everything on contract basis. So everything goes through the 900. Approximately 65% of that general fund appropriation is expended in general and administrative costs. About 50% hits our full compensation and benefits load for the Energy Authority. The Energy Authority, aside from contracted services, is very much a expert-driven process. It's very much a headcount-heavy facility and entity. With respect to the request, Mr. Chairman, there are 2. The request number 1 is for contract services amounting to $350,000 per year, ongoing 900 series. The Energy Authority is requesting additional funding in order to add 2 additional staff members. These individuals would be industry specialists tasked with advancing the state's interests in very specific resources and technology areas. One staff member would focus entirely on carbon capture utilization and storage, and the other on heritage resources such as oil, gas, and coal. Their actions and deliverables would match those typically expected from a product manager in a corporate setting. So these are individuals who are, uber focused on the advancement of a particular product. We're adopting the same approach in a different context within Wyoming. They would be expected to work full-time on these opportunities to understand the strengths and weaknesses of Wyoming's position in each area, be able to develop and administer strategies for deployment or advancement of each area, and coordinate across other agencies, organizations, and private partners. The WEA has adopted and applied this approach to hydrogen and advanced reactors, and it has proven to be very successful. It's a very efficient way of making advances in those areas quickly. The addition of these resources would also reduce the burden on existing staff members. We're a small staff and we have to play in different sandpits all the time. This would allow the WA to better fulfill its statutory obligations while remaining nimble and able to respond to other opportunities when they arise. Mr. Chairman, the second request is referred to as the Wyoming CO2 Initiative, and I will hand this over to my colleague to go through the details, but in terms of background, I'll draw your attention back to the formation of the Energy Authority. We were formed on 1st July 2020 through the merger of 2 pre-existing authorities, the Infrastructure Authority and the Pipeline Authority. That's at least where we got our resources. But it wasn't a 1 + 1 = 2 merge. It was a 1 + 1 = 1.5 or so in terms of budget and headcount and everything else. And the formation of the Energy Authority was, we had to pick up the obligations of those 2 pre-existing authorities, plus a whole bunch more. And at the time, this actually happened before I came on board, the Energy Authority, the Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute recognized that there were certain functions that were not going to be easily translatable to the new entity. So the Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute, in particular the preceding director, the late Dr. Carpenter, stepped in and took over some of those functions, particularly some of the infrastructure functions that existed there with respect to GIS services and other things that had existed in the Pipeline Authority. And the Energy Authority wasn't actually set up to continue with those. So they stood up and took care of things. That's one piece of the background I'd like you to be aware of. The name, the Wyoming CO2 Initiative, is driven because of increasing demand for pipeline services and assistance related to this infrastructure development around CO2 management, so specifically the construction of CO2 pipelines. But it's more than that. There's rapidly increasing interest in the need to build natural gas pipelines, hydrogen pipelines, ammonia pipelines, as well as refined product pipelines bringing products into the state. So we are seeing this constantly. I'm actually in a big meeting next week to discuss natural gas, hydrogen, ammonia exports from the West Coast coming from Wyoming. So this is a growing need. The last thing I'd like to mention, Mr. Chairman, is that the mechanism that we're approaching here, this recognizes that this is a responsibility of the Energy Authority that we cannot execute on directly. And so we plan to contract that service back to the Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute for very good reasons. They have oil and gas staff on site. They already have that infrastructure in place. They're located appropriately. They're in the oil and gas patch of Wyoming. They're in that system and they know the people. It's also a mechanism that is specifically called out by our statute. There is a term in there that literally states the Energy Authority should work this way when it makes sense. And this is one of those cases. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll ask my colleague to go through the details of the request.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This came out of increased requests at EORI for pipeline technical support. We absorbed the data and system that was at the Wyoming Pipeline Authority in 2020, have maintained that updated and kept that all secure. But we don't have staff for the technical support questions where they actually need help in pipeline design and putting things together. That activity's increased significantly, particularly around the CCUS, CCS, EOR world, and pipeline spurs and things that are needed. So this came from our commission, the EORC, that suggested we put together numbers that would show what would be needed to bring in that commercial pipeline expert and support staff around this person to provide that support for pipeline development in Wyoming. So we did reach out to and looked at the former budget for the Wyoming Pipeline Authority to come up with the numbers that we came up with, $335,000 for a biennium. That's one part-time consultant at 20 hours a month.
Can you move that mic a little closer?
Sorry. Yeah, the staff included is the part-time commercial pipeline advisor or expert that we estimated roughly 20 hours a month to start with, a part-time GIS specialist. IT is significant in this pipeline system. There's significant advanced software that's used along with security, and an IT person is pretty important and valuable for that. And also we're looking at this FERC updating. There is somebody doing that currently through Wyoming Energy Authority. What I understand, that person isn't proactively working with FERC and taking positions for Wyoming, state of Wyoming on pipeline issues. And we think that also is important. So the total was the $335,000 for biennium.
And for clarification, that would be ongoing 900 series, and the unique nature is that the Energy Authority would receive it and contract through to the Enhanced Oil Recovery Institute. Mr. Chairman, the Wyoming Energy Authority received 2 questions from the chairs prior to this meeting, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to address those questions. I would also appreciate the opportunity to provide a little background for the audience before I get into them. Okay, so the questions are in response to an article published in the Cowboy State Daily on 11th of November this year. The article itself reported on remarks I made during a regular public meeting of my board of directors. There was constituents who concerned that that was an interview and that I was complaining. I was not. I was reporting out on a operational issue with my board, which is the appropriate way to talk to him, I guess. The reporter in the room reported accurately on what I said. I do not dispute what he said, though the story lacked a little context and background. Also, not the reporter's fault. He asked for an interview. I did not have time to have an interview with him before he published the article. The article prompted a lot of phone calls from concerned constituents, as I'm sure you also received those. And like I said, I welcome the opportunity to set the record straight before getting to the questions themselves. So like I mentioned, I was reporting out to my board on an operational issue we were dealing with regarding backfilling the SEP, the State Energy Program Manager position. So as a point of clarification, the State Energy Program is a federal program. It's a federal funding program that is run through the State Energy Office. It takes federal money and disperses those funds to communities in the state for energy-related issues. Okay, so every state in the nation has a state energy office, and every one of them has a state energy program. The examples of some of those disbursements, we do a lot of things like energy audits. We do energy retrofit and efficiency upgrades. We've also solicited and built permitting guides. We've done some policy work. We use that money to support the WIGIS, so the Wyoming Geographical Information Service Center National Resource Explorer Tool. It's quite the acronym. The NREX tool, and it's generally community-centric energy related efforts. That's what comes through the SEP, administered by the SEO. Okay. There's a little bit of confusion that people think that Wyoming Energy Authority is the State Energy Office. It's not. The State Energy Office is a component of the Wyoming Energy Authority. So we have 5 staff members, and one of them is the person who runs the SEP and sits in the State Energy Office. I'm the person who signs the documents and everything else, but there's one person who's actually doing the work there. And aside from submitting a formula grant request every 3 years or so, the State Energy Office does not typically write grants. The State Energy Office administers grants. Okay, so we're a conduit for funds, federal funds, to get into the community. So the problem we were having is that the State Energy Program Manager, Casey Daniels, who was an exceptional employee, got a better offer, and he left the office in middle of September of this year. We actually had a very good, quick process to get a backfill for that position. The person started early in October, worked 1 day, contracted COVID, was sick for 2 weeks, and resigned on his 2-week anniversary. So that was a challenge. And
Is that a millennial?
Pardon me?
Is that a millennial? Sounds like.
Good question, Mr. Chairman. I will pass on that one. So I was reporting out on this issue, and at the time I used emotive language. I've been working closely with my board for 2.5 years. They understand me, I understand them. And I threw out words like dire straits. We're in dire straits. And what I was talking about was, yeah, we're in a hole. We've had from the middle of September, nobody running that program. Okay. And that's a challenge, and it'd probably be quite difficult to get anybody employed before the 1st of January, given the issues we'd dealt with. That's what I meant by dire straits. I also mentioned that we're in survival mode. We were, what I mentioned by that is because we were picking up that task, that load of one person spread across the rest of the staff, we had to retreat into a situation where we kept the lights on, and we kept the lights on in terms of compliance. It's a federal program. So if you drop the ball on reporting, or in fact, we're going through the audit at the time, you drop the ball on that, you're in issues with the security of that funding moving forward. Focused on the compliance, and we focused on another aspect, which we had to submit an application for a supplemental grant from the federal office. We get a base award. The infrastructure bill identified more money. We had to submit an application by the 5th of December, so Monday, to get it done. That's what I meant by survival mode. So we discussed that at length with the board. We kicked it around, and we settled on a plan. And the plan was get somebody hired, make sure we got that application done, and keep working. And that's what we have done. The constituent feedback consisted of various things: confusion about the system. It is complex, and I get it. And that was not communicated that well to the audience, which is unfortunate. We also received, commentary that we're passing the buck. We weren't stepping up. We weren't doing our job. I disagree with that. There is some thought that our comments were communicated that we weren't pursuing grants at all, which is not true at all. And I seek to clarify that. On to the questions, Mr. Chairman. If I could go ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the questions, and I quote, question 1, whether the full opportunity for federal funding is being accessed under the State Energy Program. The short answer to that, Mr. Chairman, is yes, it is. The issue that at hand at the time was whether we'd get that application in. On Monday, we did. We stepped up, we got it done. We actually got out the old SEP manager to come in and help us get it across the line. We now owe him a nice lunch, and a great thank you to Black Hills Energy for allowing him to moonlight and help us get that done. There is a lot to come though. I'm not going to say that I'm not a little, I have not at the back of my head concerns about work that is coming. The Inflation Reduction Act has a lot in there which either infers or explicitly states the State Energy Office will have to administer monies coming from that act. For example, there's a home energy performance-based whole house rebate program, which is $4.3 billion. And that explicitly says the State Energy Office will have to administer that. There's a high efficiency electrification rebate, which explicitly states the State Energy Office will have to administer that. Siting of interstate electricity transmission lines, environmental and climate justice block grants, greenhouse gas reduction fund, they all infer the State Energy Office plays a role in the administration of that. And I'm not going to say that I'm not a little bit nervous that how are we going to deal with that? But we will do what we have done in the past. We will get it done. We'll build a plan, get the resources, get the partnerships in place to get it done. There's a lack of clarity at this point in terms of what all this means. And it's not just the Wyoming Energy Authority or Wyoming in general that's dealing with that lack of clarity. All of these states, particularly on the smaller states with the smaller energy offices, are all scratching their heads waiting for direction from the Department of Energy about how this all works. But what is clear at this point is that compliance and administrative burden is going to be heavy on a lot of this. It's going to be a lot there. The compliance issues are abnormal in many cases. That Inflation Reduction Act came with a lot of requirements around things like Davis-Bacon Act, which is that you have to use union labor on all your projects. There is Justice 40 compliance issues with a lot of this stuff there, which means that 40% of the award has to go into impacted communities. And it's not that you have to do more than just claim it. You have to prove it in order to be compliant with the award. So a lot of my neighbor states and my colleagues in different states, they have a two-pronged approach: hire people and or avoid all of those programs with compliance and administrative burdens. And that's looked at as best practice currently, because nobody really knows how to do it yet. So I mentioned having a plan. We do have a plan. Get that person hired. We're coordinating with statewide organizations already in terms of how we're going to manage it, being proactive that way. And we're utilizing the National Association of State Energy Offices to try and stay abreast of it. But that will continue to be a work in progress, and we'll keep this committee informed as we move forward. Question 2, and I quote, whether WEA is providing assistance to political subdivisions, open parentheses, counties, municipalities, and special districts, including school districts, close parentheses, to prepare grants and successfully compete for energy-related grants. The short answer to that, Mr. Chairman, is no. Such assistance is not actually within the statutory obligation of this authority. It's simply outside of our scope. Consequently, the Energy Authority is not at all set up to do that. It's a burdensome process to actually get into a grant process and assist anybody. For example, but we have done it. And for example, we worked on the Build Back Better coal impacted communities, grant application last October with the Business Council and others. And that took one of my staff members, one full-time equivalent. At that time, there were only 4 people in the office entirety. So it took 25% of my head count, took them out for 2 months, 8 weeks solid on that program. We are also leading the hydrogen hub application for the state. And that has taken up a minimum of 1 FTE and at times as much as 1.5 FTE for the best part of the last year. So this is a heavy burden to get these grants written, and to expect the Energy Authority to then be out there assisting all these different other political subdivisions, it's a burden that's way too far. Furthermore, other agencies with greater resources, a greater community presence, and a mission that includes community engagement are already working on this stuff. And we work with them. That coal impacted communities grant was written with the Business Council. Another example is we actually just co-signed a response to the DOE with the Business Council. They did all the heavy lifting and we signed on to it. So that happens already. last point on that topic, Mr. Chairman, is no specific request for such assistance has yet been forthcoming. So that does not mean that we're not heavily involved in grant applications. We are doing a ton. The Wyoming Energy Authority alone, the list I'm about to give you is only what we're working on. We're the lead on the hydrogen hub application. Like I said, that takes 1 to 1.5 FTE for the last year. We're supporting SER, School of Energy Resources, excuse me, where needed on various carbon capture, utilization, and storage efforts, and we've provided cost share to 2 such applications in the last couple of weeks. We're supporting the Business Council on the direct air capture application. We're co-lead with the Public Service Commission on a grid resilience formula grant application, which is due in March. And we're administering the governor's cost share program in our office, including establishing process and procedures that are both robust and transparent. So all of that is in addition to our day jobs. So the grant writing, though, is clearly an expectation of the WEA. We get that, and it's obvious. But since it's not in our statutory obligation, I don't think it's appropriate to spend our appropriation. Didn't mean to double up on that word there, but I don't think it's appropriate to draw down our appropriation on this activity. But we recognize it's an expectation. We've coordinated efforts and done this in the past, and we've gone out after extra appropriations and external funding to try to meet that need that we recognize 100%. For example, we had an application to the U.S. Economic Development Agency for a Wyoming Energy Regional Economic Coordination Office. This is an office that other states in the neighborhood have. Utah, for example, has this, and we were successful. And that grant will provide for industrial coordination, strategies and roadmaps and development for subregions, a county by county gap and opportunity analysis. So it'll allow us to be more inward looking and provide support to our communities that way. It does not actually include any grant writing. We did have a grant writing support request to this committee last year, and I'm very thankful that you did support that request. I believe it was $600,000 for the biennium, and that was funded by appropriation from this committee in support of large-scale energy-centric state applications. So the hydrogen hub application, the direct air capture application, for the like. That money was used to hire a consultant that works on those programs. I have to admit that it has been less utilized than I thought it would be at this stage, mostly because the funding opportunities themselves have not been released, but also because our approach has changed. The School of Energy Resources has taken it upon themselves to do a lot of it in-house. The hydrogen hub application, because of the complexity, the consortium hired a prime contractor to do it. But that service is providing services right now to the direct air capture program. But there is capacity there. If it exists, if the need arises from the communities that they need help, there is capacity within that service to be directed to them should they request it. We would treat it on a case-by-case basis. It's not an infinite pool of money. But we would be happy to entertain those considerations if they are forthcoming. With that, Mr. Chairman, I sincerely appreciate the opportunity to go through those questions, and I stand ready for questions.
Mr. Chairman, please. I'll lead off. I got a couple of questions here on the budget write-up and then on the governor's recommendation. And so specifically on page 9, you had requested for 2 FTEs, one for carbon capture and storage and one for heritage resources. And then in the governor's rec, it says I recommend approval of $175,000 for one position, but it doesn't designate which position that was for. So just for clarification, I'm assuming that's for the carbon capture and storage position and not the legacy position that you'd asked for. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, I believe so. But I would not want to put words in the mouths of the advisor or the governor.
Kevin's shaking his head. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yes, and we'll pull up I-bars and show you the position classification that was approved. Put that to you.
But Kevin, what I'm trying to figure out is so there was a request for 2 positions for 2 separate things. Which one is the governor recommending to fund?
I believe it's carbon capture. And
that would be my guess, but I don't want to be presumptuous.
And I believe that is true, but I'm going to get into I-bars and we'll get the position classification that matches that amount of money. We can prove that in positively with that record.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman, the next question is actually for you, Kevin. Can you explain on this, on page 11, where it says gets back to the $335,000 appropriation, that it's effective April 1st of 2023? Why April 1st of 2023 for the effective date for this appropriation?
Mr. Chairman, normally the supplemental budget is effective immediately, but it's normalized to July 1st. The governor believes there's a expressed need to get this started as early as possible, and that would be April 1st with the legislature's approval and the signature of the governor. So we can start then rather than July 1st.
And so, Kevin, on that, that would be for the full, and then it talks about not biennializing that also, the differential between the 50 and the 285.
Yeah, so I think this is a good opportunity to talk about how that reads, because you got the 335, and then you got effective immediate April of 2023. Now there's 3 months that is in the current fiscal year 2023. That needs to be one time. And then what happens is that becomes the 24 is also included, but only the 24, which is really the second 12 months of the biennium, becomes biennialized.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's expressly written that way so that we can make absolutely certain that we don't mistakenly biennialize those 3 months.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, one more, and Glenn, this would be for you. And you talked about the complexity of applying for those DOE monies for the hydrogen project and stuff. And it would appear to me that if the state is successful in acquiring those federal funds, that it's going to take some significant administration. My experience as somebody that does a lot of professional grant writing, once you receive the grant, it's a hell of a lot more work than just writing that. So just a time frame of expectations where that may show up, and then how would you cover that administrative cost, or is that going to be something that's provided by SCR or business council?
I think Kevin wants to answer part of that question.
Yes. Mr. Chairman, there was an appropriation that's provided by the legislature, the governor's office, to specifically get involved with all areas across the expanse of Wyoming's economy, including local governments, for grant writing. So we have initiated B11. It's flown through the LSO process, and we should receive approval for advertising that position today. And then we have a committee. Jeremiah Riemann is going to be on a committee. Kathy Lenz, which works for the senator, she'll be on that. Myself, Rennie McKay, and we're going to be looking at hiring that position to facilitate all grant writing and also the state budget department. We have legs in administrating contracts and funding. So in this case, we offer our assistance to these agencies to help facilitate not only the capture of the grants, but the administration of those as well, with the assistance of the state auditor's office.
Yeah, so just, and maybe that last part captured it. It takes a significant more amount of time to administer them than it does to write them. And that's what I'm trying to figure out. If we get this large hydrogen project, where's the administration of that grant going to lie?
So let me give you a further example. Okay, we have a contract with Clifton Larson now. And one of the things that we discovered through that process is the need for us to be able to communicate with everybody, including the local government, the necessity of all the requirements that you have to have for reporting and administrating government contracts. One of those things that are particularly nasty is subrecipient reporting, which expertise across some of the expansive enterprise, Department of Health, the Department of Transportation, they see that very well. But local governments struggle in that arena. So we have monthly meetings right now that all the local governments are welcome to participate in, and also the agencies, so that we can help them facilitate those needs. And one of the most important things is the warehouse of the data, the decision-making, in accordance to the grant, and then all the follow-up reporting. And that mostly is associated with making sure that you have your financial records in order. And on top of that, we're going to use some of the leftover CARES money to warehouse all the decisions that we made and all the records that we did on COVID. And that's happening with ARPA as well right now with our consultant. So we recognize exactly what you are discussing. And we want to set up a process where the expertise that we have in other places can help facilitate those in need.
Mr. Chairman, I've got another question, but Kevin, I'll bring this up later. I didn't aware there was any leftover CARES Act funding, but we'll have that discussion.
Well, basically what comes through on that is if there's small pieces of CARES, small reversions of CARES money, and we have B11 those dollars, and we warehouse them on one B11 and we captured that. And there's a provision, and we knew this provision existed, that after the sunset of the CARES date, which is like March of 2022, you couldn't expend it, with the exception of auditing and developing the records. We knew that. So we're going to use that money, and we had to put a letter into the US Treasury before the end of September with our estimate of that cost, and those dollars that we are carving those little pieces out each time that we have those, that's going to facilitate the state of Wyoming warehousing all the needs for the audit of CARES. Everything is going to be managed in the cloud, and eventually, this is going to all be on the consultant cloud as we progress through ARPA. But then there's a provision in this piece of the contract that we have that we will shift that over to the state of Wyoming's ownership. So there are places where they estimated that they're going to buy X for $10 and it cost them $9. We're taking that $1 and positioning Wyoming's future to pass those audits.
All right, Mr. Chairman, back to you, Glenn.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, it's a good question, and with the burden of administering a $1.25 billion application is colossal with respect to the hydrogen hub itself. The good news is that it is an infrastructure application, so the administrative cost is essentially project management cost, which is in many ways written into the application and will be met by the actual industrial partners. Once we've submitted the application, the intent, certainly the hope, is that the state representation and hands-on aspect of it is lessened considerably. So the administrative burden to the state will be minimalized, I hope.
Thank you. Go ahead, Representative Larson.
So I guess my question is, were you done asking this question?
I'm done, sir.
So there's a question in here, Mr. Chairman, and it goes back to comment that Chairman Kinski brought up with the Business Council. These guys, it's probably the smallest, probably the smallest agency we've got, if we call it an agency, are these guys. They're developing the pipeline hydrogen hub for application. They're doing CCUS. They're over pipelines. They're working very hard integrating how we integrate nuclear and wind and solar, writing the grants for DOE and direct air capture stuff. The last 3 days, starting on Tuesday, Wednesday, today's Thursday, Tuesday, Wednesday, finishing up today, these guys have been out recruiting industries to come to energy-related industries, manufacturing as producers, to come to Wyoming and say, make a home here. The last 3 days, they've had a company, a Fortune 1000 company out of Alexandria, Virginia here that spent the day here in Cheyenne. And to your point, Chairman Kinski looked at these, they took them out and showed them the industrial parks and completely impressed these guys that these resources were available for manufacturing facilities. Yesterday, they went to the Trona mines and then flew to Gillette to look at our manufacturing capacities. I took them, I invited these guys to come to the Capitol the other night and walked them through. And at the end of the day, just ask them what did they like? And they were so impressed with the Energy Authority and the opportunity to come out, and then couldn't say enough about being able to see these industrial parks and to visit, because they're trying to figure out manufacturing, and they've got a DOE contract that might benefit the state. So I say, well done. I'm just curious. So my question in here was, How do you think it went?
I have heard very positive things. I can share that a large industrial services company within Wyoming is now in discussions with that group regarding the development of a business plan to build opportunities within the state, which are all along the same language of added value, supply chains, manufacturing, services, jobs, heavy steel, heavy industry. It went extremely well.
Mr. Chairman, we was at SCR and the director brought up the School of Engineering and perked their ears up and said, we need interns. You guys, you interns, you know, they just were very cooperative and liked what they saw. So good job.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good, Chair.
All right.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you. So if I say Murrell, is that right? Mr. Murrell, thank you. And please stay on me. I was one of the authors of not the questions, but the concern. Stay on task, of course, with your big hydrogen hub, direct air capture, all those projects. They're high profile, they're important, they're potentially, you know, home runs for the state of Wyoming. With that, I'm curious, you asked for not 2 employees, but contracts that would be the equivalent of 2 FTEs. And the governor only recommended 1. Do we know why, given the importance of these projects, that Mr. Murrell only got 1 of the 2 requested positions? Kevin?
Mr. Chairman, I actually have 4 bullet points in anticipation of these questions eventually. In the agencies, the governor's letter to the agencies that he instructed everybody for their budgets. The agency supplemental budget requests modifications are considered to be an emergency in nature. Now, this is right in the instructions. And then understand that Governor Gordon is really striving to get us in the position where we're cutting a budget during the budget session with very little extra work in the supplemental process. That's his mission, to get us to that place where the supplemental budget is truly a supplemental budget. Accordingly, within narrow limits and solid support, he will consider items that are absolutely critical to the well-being of agencies and the future of the state. In addition, agencies should review the priorities that they have presented. Remember, in the normal budget process, you have the priority tables, make sure that you're modifying those or working to that end to leverage the existing funding. I recommend each agency continue to manage their budgets as conservatively as possible, and with the understanding that positions are growth in government. And we were very careful, and we put extreme limits on position requests. And that put us in a place where we thought, well, yes, this is a place where we want to go, but let's start this in the supplemental and then expect that in the normal budget process when we balance the standard for the upcoming 25-26 session.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, please.
I get all that. I appreciate it. But given that these are not going to be full-time employees, they're contract employees, 1, 2, given the fluidity of the situation, I mean, every day I pick up the newspaper, I learn something different about all these evolving technologies and the grants and the opportunities. Doesn't this seem a situation that you might make an exception to that hardcore, it's got to be an emergency rule? Wouldn't it be a shame to lose one of these opportunities because we said to Mr. Murrell, wait till the next budget cycle?
So yes, these agencies, similar to like the Business Council, they're quasi and they don't have necessarily the position numbers in the budget themselves, but the funding is there to hire employees, and those employees can be a contract employee, they could be a full-time employee of that nature. And then to reiterate, we looked at positions and we measured that to the expanse of the overall enterprise and did our best to recognize what was important and a need for the supplemental without trying to get in a situation where all of a sudden we cut 408 positions in the last couple of years, and now we're just putting them back. So we did put a critical level of review on these positions. Is this worthy? Absolutely. Are some of the other positions that have been discussed that weren't approved? Yes, but there has to be some level of review and constraint on the enterprise for position.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To follow on from Mr. Miro. So I don't understand exactly the structure of the agency, but I thought you said there's 5 components, one of which is SEO, and then you reeled off a host of grants, some of which sound like they ought to be administered by a completely different agency. It sounded like almost like the energy efficiency grants that I think DFS administers. Would it make sense for some of these to be just to hang on to the ones that are clearly within your mission and then see if we spin some of those others off to other agencies? If I'm understanding the nature of the grants correctly.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, Co-Chair Kinski, yes, I think you're referring to the ones that we anticipate coming through the Inflation Reduction Act. And we will absolutely go through that process of, especially the ones that are inferred to land on my desk, if there's a better desk that it should land on. That's just a part of the process. And I refer back to the infrastructure bill, sorry, the Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act. The state apparatus did that as a collective. They're administered by the governor's office. We got all the agencies together to identify all the programs, high grade them, put a name behind who's doing what and everything else. So we will absolutely follow the same approach when the clarity is provided by those.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Miro and Mr. Co-Chair.
Mr. Chairman.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Looking at your just standard budget, is your in-state and out-of-state travel adequate to allow you to get all the work done that we're hoping you will accomplish?
And Mr. Chairman, Representative Walders, yes, it is. We are cautious with our travel. We don't travel with frivolous means. I have done a lot of travel in the last year, mostly to meetings that we have been used where I participate actively. I'm not just a conference participant. I'm there on the panel promoting and everything else. And no, our travel budget, both in and out of the state, is adequate.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, I have a question about the hydrogen hub in particular. The one proposed north of Luss by Manville. And I was wondering what the process is to coordinate with local governments and private property owners and lessees on that state ground where they're trying to lease for that hydrogen hub. Could you address that for me?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Steinmetz, yes, a good question. So the hydrogen hub that we're applying for is a collective between 4 states, Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico, to establish a 4-state infrastructure ecosystem, projects with interconnects, pipelines, offtake, that sort of aspect of a full network of systems. The specific project you refer to is actually not under consideration within the 4-state application, but I know the one that you're talking about. They have certainly done a fair amount, I believe, their own public-facing engagement with the community. They're active in that space through various hearings associated with permits and other things. That application or that process is mirrored by any industrial development process within the state that they'll have to go through that as well. I hope that did that answer your question.
Yes, it did. I would be interested in talking with you maybe offline about how we beef up that community process, because I think we're finding some glitches in it.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Steinmetz, I welcome that anytime. And since this is being broadcast, I want anybody who's listening, that is why the Energy Authority is there. We serve that role, particularly in terms of the vetting of some of these projects. The project you're talking about is a good project, but there is certainly projects that come across our desk where we scratch our head about. And if we're scratching our head, then the community leaders are they're in a tough spot. So I welcome that. I invite anybody in the community to reach out. We will spend as much time as needed to help answer their questions and improve their knowledge about what they're dealing with.
Thank you very much.
Okay, further questions? All right. What, Don?
Mr. Chairman, just a quick clarifying question.
on your priority number 2, when you're working with the EORC, you actually classify that as 600 series, not 900 series. Is that correct?
What is it? It should be 900, right? Mr. Chairman, it should be 900.
Got that, Don? Is that? Okay. Anything else? All right. Thank you, Glenn. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Always be careful when you talk to reporters.
Go get that hydrogen hub by Christmas.
Yeah. Ho, hydrogen. Okay. We're moving along. This is good stuff. Next is DEQ. Todd, how's it going? Come on up.
I mean, I wrote some notes.
Oh, you want to? Do you want to verify your list, or do you want to? You do.
Yeah, but I know.
Please, Todd.
All right.
Welcome. Happy holidays.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Please fire away. Good to see you.
Yeah,
Glad you're
good to
still
see you.
around.
Looks like we got the whole group is here now. I'm Todd Parfit. I'm the Director of the Department of Environmental Quality. Like to introduce the senior leadership team for the DEQ. To my right is Kimber Wickman, Administrator for the Management Services Division. Alan Edwards, who is the Deputy Director and Industrial Siting Administrator. Nancy Veer, Air Quality Administrator. Suzanne Ingalls, Solid and Hazardous Waste Division Administrator, and then Jennifer Zigmund, Water Quality Administrator. Kyle Wentland, Land Quality Division Administrator, and then Don Newton, the Abandoned Mine Lands Program Administrator. So that's the team, and they're here to help answer any questions that you might have. We do have 4 supplemental budget requests that meet the criteria of emergency need or critical to the core functions of the agency. And what I'd like to do is walk you through the budget book, and starting on page 3. And then page 3 is the summary table. And the reason I want to bring you there first is when I look at the budget, I look at it in 2 ways, one with AML and one without AML. AML represents 58% of our budget. So it kind of skews things when we're trying to see how the other programs are funded. So just to give you a breakout, with AML, we're 19% generally funded, 69% federally funded, and 12% other funds. If you take AML out of the equation, we're 45% general fund, 26% federal, and 29% other funds. And why that's important is it lets me evaluate how we stack up against other states across the country in terms of federal funding. The national average for states is about 27% federal funds. We're right at 26%. So we're right at the national average for federal funding. So now if we move to page 9, this is the summary table of the supplemental requests in priority. There are, as I mentioned, there are 4 supplemental budget requests. We're asking for 3 additional FTE, 2 in water quality, 1 in administration. Priority 1 is for 1 FTE, a senior professional geologist for the carbon sequestration program, the Class 6 UIC. Priority 2 is a senior financial statistician in administration for the new assigned trust bonding program that was passed through the legislature last year. And priority 3 is a water quality division, a senior engineer for the administration of the ARPA funds and the infrastructure bill funds primarily for the state revolving fund programs. We would do this work in conjunction with the Office of State Lands and Investment and the Water Development Office. And then priority 4 is a reappropriation of the abandoned mine land prior balance funds, moving those funds to the Air Quality Division for monitoring and modeling purposes. The total request is $615,963. Of that, the general funds, $270,793, and federal funds, $345,169. To break that down just a little bit further, of the general funds, 44,000 are one-time funds, and of the federal funds, 218,000 are one-time. So the recurring costs of the request would be $353,711 on an annual basis, and biennialized it would be $707,422. So that's just a quick summary, and we'll get into each one of the requests as we move along. So next, I would take you to page 11, which is the first request. And on page 11, what we have is the request for one FTE in administration, and this is the senior financial statistician. And the reason for the position, really two reasons. One is back in about 2015, when we had the full bankruptcies, we made a decision as an agency to centralize all the bonding that we do as an agency under administration. Before, it was kind of piecemeal within each of the divisions. And so currently we have one full-time employee for the agency that does all the bonding reviews. And across 5 divisions, we have 1,285 bonding instruments totaling $3.4 billion. Adding to that, then we had the fiscal note, we had the assigned trust bill, House Bill 45, Enrolled Act number 9, and consistent with the fiscal note that we had presented on that bill last year. We had requested an additional FTE for the assigned trust. And what the assigned trust bill did, just in summary, it's an alternative bond instrument. It's voluntary, but it's similar to cash, and it's one of the lower risk type of instruments that we would offer. And right now it's applicable to land quality division only for the coal, bentonite, trona, and uranium industries. We are proceeding with the rulemaking for the assigned trust, and we expect those rules to be heard by the Environmental Quality Council on February 21st of 2023. And with that, we anticipate the program to be up and running by mid-May or sooner. This position would need to work very closely with the Land Quality Division, the State Treasurer, and the Management Services Division in the implementation. This position would be important and necessary to meet the timelines associated with permitting and avoid any permit backlog. The total request for the position is $116,400. It's 100% generally funded, but it is important to note that we would recoup a majority of the cost through the indirect cost rate, which is the administrative overhead costs associated with federal and fee programs. On page 12, the governor's recommendation is approval of the $116,392. Of that, $7,459 is one time, and a $108,933 is to be biennialized in biennial fiscal year 25. So I'm going to stop there and see if there's any questions.
Question. So my question, and as we talk about this, Todd, is that you talked a little bit about a backlog in the permitting process. And so I'm curious just where we stand with that and if it's in a particular locations, whether it's which of your divisions and what's the timing in terms of various applications? You know, obviously we want to give you as many people as you need so that there is no backlog and that you can turn these things over as rapidly as reasonably possible.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say that there's a backlog right now. We're projecting there could be a backlog as we add 2 new programs to the bonding responsibilities. The first one is this assigned trust bill. And the second one is associated with the carbon capture and storage. And each one of those permits is going to require a bond instrument. And so right now we're projecting, well, right now we have 7 applications in-house for the UIC, and we're projecting at least 40 in the first part of next year. And there may be more with the 45Q, I can't remember if it was in the Inflation Reduction Act where it changed the amount that's available for the storage carbon. And so there's going to be more interest. And so that's what I'm talking about with the potential backlog. I'm not saying that we have a backlog right now.
Okay. Well, and I was just asking it in general for all of your agency. Are we kicking out permits that are, you know, sufficient timeframes, and are you comfortable with what you have?
Yeah. So Mr. Chairman, I would say right now, we're not hearing anything to the contrary, that we have a bottleneck that's creating a slowdown in the permitting efforts. I will say that with the infrastructure bill, there's just a lot of different programs, the infrastructure bill and the ARPA funds, we are going to see additional permitting needs for construction permits and water quality. And so you'll see that that's why we have one of those positions that we're requesting would fill that need.
Thank you, Director Parfit. When on this bonding, when this committee a few years ago redone the capital construction and procurement statutes, we and defined capital construction, your agency and Abandoned Mines, and Mr. Edwards was helpful on this, but you within your agency started reviewing those bonding requirements for AML stuff, really kind of says, let us help, and we appreciate that. I'm just curious how that's gone, because I think that's in the same, that's this person that you're trying to get help to, but has that gone okay? Have you guys, Dawn, is that working all right for you guys doing that in-house?
I'll start out and then just say, yeah, I think it's working well. We have a pretty good relationship with construction management agency, Director Vincent and his crew. And that seems to be working very well.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
A couple questions associated with this position for the engineer for the SRF funds. And you alluded to the fact that you work and coordinate with the grants division, maybe Beth Blackwell within OSLI and stuff. And so when I read the description of this, it looks a little bit similar to the position that we already funded in the Office of State Lands and Investments to help with these type of grants through RUS for these small communities. It's an engineering position. I know it hasn't really panned out because of COVID and a lot of other responsibilities. They filled that position now. In fact, I've talked to the individual over there working with trying to help some of the communities with RUS, SRF, water development, and a host of other potential funding mechanisms, including some of these ARPA funds that were distributed by SLIB for these grants. And so what I'm trying to understand is this looks a little bit like a bit of a duplication of effort. So that's one question.
Okay.
But I have a follow-up. Go ahead.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, there isn't really duplication. It is true that they're both associated with the SRF programs, but the responsibilities of the two agencies are different. we're providing the technical and engineering support to the local communities for a variety of issues. Whereas the Office of State Land and Investment, granted, they are the lead for the SRF programs, but theirs is more on the funding aspects and the processing of which projects, which communities get the funding. Now, we do weigh in and provide our technical input to those decisions, but they are separate and distinct. One's very much engineering oriented and providing that technical assistance to the local communities versus the program administration and the fiscal administration.
So, Mr. Chairman, just to follow up on that, I'm curious as the aspects of the engineering, because many of these programs go through water development program for master plans. A lot of that engineering is provided through that 100% grant stuff. So are we now competing with the private sector with engineering these for these other projects? And what about these municipalities that all retain PEs? You know, some of the large ones have their own engineering staff. And so I just need to understand the nature of what this engineer that would be doing versus the difference of either a city engineer or an engineering firm that was hired as part of a water development project, raw water or something like that.
Yeah. And I might ask Jennifer Zigmund to come up and maybe talk more specifically about the role of that position.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jennifer Zigmund, Water Quality Division Administrator. So as Director Parfit indicated, we do the technical assistance role with SRF. Our engineers don't create the designs for these projects, but they are charged with reviewing them to make sure that they meet our rules and the standards and specifications that we establish in our rules. So we do need to have a professional engineer review what is submitted as part of the projects, make sure that they're in compliance with our regulations, and issue the permits to construct for these infrastructure projects. And when we're reviewing the SRF projects themselves, we're reviewing them for compliance, again, with our rules and federal requirements. So we're not duplicating the work that private engineering firms are doing. It's just our engineer review to make sure that it's in compliance with our rules and regulations.
All right. Now, the next question is, as I see in the governor's recommendation, biannualizes this. ARPA funds have a sunset date. They got to be spent by 2024. We don't know on the bipartisan infrastructure law. Why are we creating this position that looks like it's going to be part of your standard request when these are specifically targeted for those federal programs? As a biannualized, it will show up in your standard budget. That's a little bit of a concern.
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, we discussed that when we met with the governor, and one of the things that we decided was that this would be a time-limited position, and you'll see that when we get there, is that this position would only be authorized through July 1 or June 30 of 2033. And that's when we think that all of the work associated with the funds and the projects will be complete.
I don't see that in the recommendation.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, I think if you look at page 20, maybe it's not 20. Yeah, on page 20 at the bottom of the page, you'll see that it's specified to be a time-limited position.
2033. So for 10 years.
10 years.
But my understanding is the ARPA funds have to be expended by the end of 2024.
Yes, that's, I'm not sure if it's 2024 or 2026.
25, 26. What?
Yeah, but
This
it's
is
more
a lot
than
longer past the expiration date of those funds.
yes. And Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, that's because the infrastructure bill funds would go for a much longer period of time in terms of the monies would be awarded by or available in 2026. But by the time all the money has been awarded and all the projects are complete, we're estimating that it would take another 5 to 10 years So we went on the short side and said, okay, for 5 more years to actually do all of the construction and the oversight and the permitting, that would get us to 2033. And that's why we picked 2033 for that position to sunset.
So in the bill, BIL, Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, how much of that was dedicated towards water and sewer? I'm trying to think, that might have been the bill that I think Representative Simpson brought last year. Because ARPA was a direct appropriations to the state. We know how much money. I always thought that the bill was an application process that you had to apply for those federal funds for specific projects, and then they had to be reviewed and approved. And so it gets back to the nature of the 2023. We really don't know whether we're going to get any of that or not. And that's what I'm trying to get at, Director.
Yeah. So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, there are several pots of money associated with the bill, the infrastructure bill. And certainly we may or may not take all of that. It depends on discussions that we're going to have down the road with what the strings are attached to the funds and so forth. But there are several buckets of money outside of the ARPA funds. You've got your traditional SRF funding that would be as normal. And then on top of that, you would have a clean water SRF infrastructure bill funds up to 63 million over 5 years. And then you would have the emerging contaminants with the clean water SRF program is another 4.6 million over 5 years. The drinking water SRF infrastructure bill would be 130 million over 5 years. And then the drinking water SRF for lead line replacement is 144 million over 5 years. And then emerging contaminants under the drinking water SRF would be another 38 million over the 5 years. All told, we're looking at close to $500 million over a 5-year period for distribution.
So, Mr. Chairman, just for clarification, those are nationwide distributions or just to the state of Wyoming?
Mr. Chairman, that's just for the state of Wyoming.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
may I add to that?
You may.
This last ARPA monies that we set aside, we received nearly $250 million of requests from our municipalities and water and sewer districts. Based on that and having my understanding of utilities around the state, I believe that there is $1 billion of needs in water and wastewater projects around the state. So when we talk about $500 million with strings attached that many of our communities won't be able to afford because many of our communities are not low to mod income, so they won't qualify, I'm anticipating. And so this program really is real and the need is real out there for it. Don't you agree, Director?
I would agree.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question for Kevin on page 12. You discussed that this is $7,400 be one time, the remainder $108,000 ongoing and biennialized, but you don't specify a start date. Similar to on page 16, you specify an effective date, a one-time amount, and then a biennialized amount. So what do we have going on that's slightly different in those two
That's
aspects?
an excellent question. And it's related to the fact that the normal one-time objects within I-bars, 241 at 6,073, and the 242, the 1,386, that adds up to 7,459. That's just normally one time. We would not do anything with that. And it's just a normal effective immediate with the standard budget, which is the supplemental budget in July.
It's always
That's what
fun to
we
light up
normally
Kevin's light at the end of the day.
I'm sorry.
I said, it's always fun to see your light go on at the end of the day.
Mr. Chairman, we kind of hopscotched around. Has he covered all the positions? Because we were jumping back and forth.
Go ahead, Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator Kinsky. Back to where I was, we had just finished up the one position for administration for the bonding. And we're transitioning to page 16 which is the 1 FTE in water quality. This is our number one priority for an environmental, senior environmental geologist. And we are requesting, and this gets back to the question that was asked of Kevin. We're requesting that this position be effective April 1, 2023. So it's for 15 months rather than the normal 12 months in the supplemental. And this is again is for the Class 6 UIC carbon capture and sequestration program. We are one of 2 states that have primacy for CCS or Class 6 UIC permitting, the other being North Dakota. We obtained that primacy in 2020. Why that's important is we can process permits for Class 6 UIC within 6 to 12 months, where it will take the federal agencies up to 2 years or longer. So right now we have 4 applications in-house. We expect that before the end of this year, we'll have another 7. So we'll have 11 applications in-house. As I mentioned earlier, we expect that to go up by at least 40 or more in early 2023. And this gets to the increased tax credits in the Inflation Reduction Act from $50 a ton to $85 a ton. So this position is generally funded, or the request is for general funds for the position, but it's important to keep in mind that the applicants pay a processing fee for the application, similar to how the industrial siting division works. The positions in industrial siting are generally funded. When we have projects where we have applications, then we assess a fee, and that fee then offsets the 100 series general funds, and then those would then revert back at the end of the year or at the end of the biennium. So there is an application fee for Class 6 permits. It's established at $20,000 right now, approximately $20,000 per application. We have other fees associated with the program, which include a 7-cent per ton special revenue count for long-term monitoring that the state will have to do at the end of the project. We have financial assurance requirements, as we talked about, in terms of the need for the bonding position. And then we are considering an annual fee similar to the North Dakota that would cover the other program costs. And then like most of our programs, it seems like there's potential infrastructure bill funds available to Wyoming of up to $1 million. We're waiting on the guidance from EPA on that. So we expect that within the next few months. So right now, the groundwater program is where the Class 6 UIC program is housed. They do have other duties that where they're fully utilized, and that includes Class 1 permits for UIC, where we have 36 of those, and then 1,300 Class 5 UIC permits that they manage. They also manage the formerly used defense sites, emerging contaminants like PFOA and PFAS, that's perfluoroalkyl substances, and that's a really big issue nationally. And then source water protection, and then remediation of groundwater contaminated sites. So in summary, the governor's recommendation is approval of $154,401. Of that, as we talked about, $36,758 is one time, and $117,643 would be biennialized in biennium fiscal year 25.
Great questions on that position?
Yeah.
All right, seeing none, please go ahead.
Okay, so now I take you to page 20. And this is a request for 1 FTE. We've talked a little bit about this already. And this is a senior environmental engineer to manage the additional duties associated with ARPA and the infrastructure bill funds and the SRF programs. As we discussed, this is a time-limited position through June 30, 2033. The increased workload would consist of water and wastewater permitting, site visits, monitoring and reporting, community outreach, technical assistance, and coordination with other local, state, and federal agencies. We believe that we can cover this through the drinking water SRF set aside funds. We can set aside up to 31% of the capitalization grants under the drinking water program. And so there would be funds available under the traditional drinking water SRF, the infrastructure build, drinking water SRF program, the lead line replacement, and then the emerging contaminant pools that we discussed. And then we would do all this in coordination again with the Office of State Land Investment and the Water Development Office. Just to give you a kind of a sense of how much money is available to be set aside, I think we talked about it's close to 500 million is available through the infrastructure bill and the traditional SRF programs, but we would have over $100 million available over the next 5 years, depending on how much of the grant funds that we accept available for the set aside to fund positions that would be necessary. And in this case, be one position or one FTE for the DEQ for those purposes. The governor recommends approval of the 134,594. This is all 100. It would be 100% federally funded. And then one-time costs would be 7,459, and then 127,135 to be biennialized in fiscal year 25 biennium. And that covers all the positions that we were.
Okay. Other questions for Todd?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, please. Coach you.
So thanks for covering the rest of those. And now I'm going to circle back to the initial inquiry from Co-Chairman Nicholas. Is there a backlog? And you said, I haven't heard different. I have, but it's hearsay. And I'd prefer to have some data rather than hearsay. Do you track the number of days from receipt of an application till its issuance and what the maximum statutory time is, and whether that's growing longer or shorter depending on the number of applications?
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Kinski, we do have dashboards that track that by division and program, so we can provide that. But I'm not hearing, usually the trade associations, the mining association or the petroleum association will reach out to us if they're hearing from their constituents that there's backlogs or time delays in the permitting efforts. And we're not hearing anything that would be alarming that there's a serious backlog. There may be one-offs where there might be a few permits where it may take longer than others.
Specifically, it was an applicant who was told we're so backlogged and understaffed that we're taking the maximum statutory time on all applications. So you might want to let your folks know that there's not a backlog, assuming that was true, that an applicant was told. I'd welcome the dashboard.
Yeah, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the extent that if we're aware of that, we can certainly look at to see if it's a one-time, it may be specific to a project, or if it's more a systemic issue, we'd certainly be interested in looking at that, because we want to not just meet the statutory timeline, we want to be efficient with all of our permitting activities.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Parfit.
So, and I think part of that is they say, well, there's so many permits out there. You have to get in line. So when your application comes in, it's at the end of the line, and you have to work up to get to the other ones. So what I'm curious is how many are in line that makes you need to go use the full statutory periods for whichever type permits that we're talking about. And let me just put this in context. For example, let's say that there's a company that's going to put a new soda ash mine in the southwest corner. They want to get up and running as fast as possible. They've got to go through almost every one of your different divisions in order to get there. And in the past, we've talked about getting like assigning one person to a large project like that to help walk it through each one of your agencies and facilitate it so that it basically is kind of a fast track, because the difference is on a project that's going to have 2,000 employees on it for 2 years and then 400 full-time employees after that. It's a big deal. And in 1 year, one business year for them, and the cost of construction over 2 years that's delayed in that project, is huge, and it could be the life or death of the project. So in that situation, do you do fast tracking, or do you have ombudsman, or can the private entity come in and say, here's our project, walk us through what we have to do so we can get there as fast, and they can pay for that person, add even extra staff to your office if necessary. You know, they do that on the federal side. So I'm just curious how you handle projects like that, or how it works.
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, yes, we do have examples of larger projects that will come into the agency or contact the agency, and we will arrange to have all of the divisions, all of the permits that are required so that we can talk with that particular entity or applicant about what they're going to need from the agency. So they'll walk away from that meeting on knowing what permits they're going to need and which ones are going to take the longest in the process. So we'll walk them through the entire process with each division or each program requirement. And typically the long pole in the tent, if you will, is with the major projects is with Title V, the air quality permits. Those typically take up to 18 months. But we'll cover all of that so that they know how to sequence the submittal of their permit applications so that they don't fall behind.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
One question, and Todd, and it gets to the nature of this appropriations effective April 1st for a couple of these positions. So is it the anticipation that you would start advertising before that time frame? And it gets to the question of, is we're appropriating money for that last 3 months of this fiscal year. You would actually have to, from the time that money, because we're looking at April 1st, you'd already have to have advertised and call consultant selections and offered that position. Or is it once that's triggered that you start advertising April 1st? And so if that's the case, how long does it normally take to fill one of these positions?
I mean, Mr. Chairman, that's a good question. I would have to check with A&I and the Human Resource Department on when we could, but we'd have to have a position number and we'd have to have the position approved. So if there's a delay in that, if we can't public notice until we have that in hand, and I might need some help from somebody with A&I and what we can and can't do there. But I would agree with you that if we can't public notice a position until April 1, that does create the delay. Now, to the question as to how long does it typically take, it depends on the position. Now, this would be a senior engineer position, and those typically are a little easier to fill than the entry-level engineer position. So I would say, we would fill that relatively quickly.
So relatively quickly, meaning that first you would go to A&I on April 1st and get a position number and then advertise. How long do you typically advertise for these positions?
Well, we can leave it open until filled. So there's no reason we can't start interviewing as applications come in. So yeah, I mean, there are different ways we can do that. Typically, we advertise for a couple of weeks. But like I said, we can do it open until filled and start interviewing right away.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Director Parfit. I value your request today. I appreciate your vision for the future and trying to run your department well the way you do. I have an independent question for you today. As you're fully aware, Wyoming is the only state in the United States of America that does not have primacy over its water, clean water. And people in my district are really, really frustrated receiving directions from EPA. They want to work with DEQ. So has your agency ever been requested to put forth a vision, a plan of how you might take primacy? If we told you we're going to take primacy, what is it going to take in your department to make that happen?
So, Mr. Chairman, we have looked at that in the past at the request of the legislature in terms of what it would take to assume the program and become a primacy state for drinking water. And I think it was back in 2018. timeframe. And the FTE necessary to get primacy for the program would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 24 FTE. And I forget how many millions of dollars it was going to cost to stand up the program. Now, we met and had a discussion with the Select Water Committee a couple of months ago, and this same question came up. And what we said we would do is kind of dust off the previous information and update it, and then we could make that available to whatever committee, this committee or the Select Water Committee or Minerals Committee, and revisit that. And so we're actually doing that right now, is dusting off the old information and updating that and what it would take. We do understand that there is frustration on the sanitary surveys that EPA conducts, and we don't always agree with the outcome of those sanitary surveys that they conduct. And when that does happen, as happened in towns like Afton and Pinedale and others, we work with those communities and provide technical assistance and join the meetings with them and EPA and try to get to a positive outcome.
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
there are legislators that would like to take that big step this year, and so you're going to see some legislation to that effect. I was really proud of our DEQ. Jennifer went toe to toe against EPA at a public meeting and called them on the carpet because their process was wrong. Their assumptions were wrong. They were doing things that those of us local know better. And we appreciate DEQ being there and backing the communities up. But look forward to that legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So you want that in addition to the other 200 million for the water project?
Yes, please.
Okay, anything more for Todd?
He's got one more.
Oh, please go ahead, Tom. I'm sorry.
And Mr. Chairman, just one final remark on the drinking water program. Certainly EPA, every year they raise that issue with me because they have interest in the state taking on the drinking water program because it takes their resources to implement it. But they're not willing to provide those same resources to the state as a federal match. And I think the last time we talked, they said they would be able to provide the state with about $700,000 towards the implementation of the program. And we think that they can do better. So,
Do we know what they provide for other states?
no, but I can find that out through the Environmental Council.
And I'd like to know, take the smaller states, how big if they have primacy, how big their departments are. And if 24 is realistic, or what the smallest, just to know those numbers, it would be valuable, I think. And if there's a bill out there, we need it before that bill shows up to have an educated way to respond to it.
Yeah. So, Mr. Chairman, like I said, the Water Quality Division is, dusting off that information and
Okay.
pulling it
All right.
together. So
Appreciate it.
so they'll dust it off a little faster.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, just then to wrap up, the last request is on page 24 or 25 rather. And that is related to the AML prior balance funds. And if you recall, back in 2008, it was Senator Enzi that worked really hard to get monies that were owed to the state returned to the state from the AML program from the Department of Interior. And that amounted to 578.9 million. And that was to be paid back to the state in seven equal installments of 82.7 million. Those funds eventually were paid back to the state minus federal sequestration. And then the legislature appropriated those funds over the years. And one of those grants, the grant in 2010 included a project in the governor's office for the CO2 pipeline, which came in with their additional funds left over at the end of that process of $210,576. in order to close out that grant and make good use of those funds, we're requesting that amount of prior balance funds be appropriated to the DEQ for monitoring and modeling efforts that we have in that division. So the governor recommends approval on a one-time request of $210,575, which is federal dollars, considered federal.
Representative.
Mr. Chairman, Director Parfit, what strikes me about this money is really old. I mean, this money was generated from taxes paid by coal mines before 2008. And it's been sitting somewhere for a long time. I'm surprised that it even exists. So my first question is, are there any other pockets of prior balance funds hidden anywhere that we don't know about?
So
They're truly hidden.
Stand up
You
and-
can't answer that question. Yeah. If they're truly hidden, we don't know.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stiff, there are no hidden buckets of money that I'm aware of. But all of the money that we received back from the prior balance funds were appropriated by the legislature and how those monies would be spent. And our role right now is that we track those expenditures and then we close out the grants with OSM when those projects are complete.
Go ahead, but wait, follow up.
Mr. Chairman, yes, follow-up question, Director Parfit. So because and obviously prior balance funds can basically be spent on anything. They don't have to. They're not as restricted as, say, current AML funds that come into your agency. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, it's somewhat correct. It can't be spent on anything. It has to have some kind of a mineral connection. So I wouldn't say as far as it could be spent on anything. But it is true that there are fewer or different types of restrictions than on the traditional in lieu funds that we see for the AML program.
Well, Mr. Chairman, and so you've made the choice here to not spend it, say, on the communities affected by coal mining, but rather to spend it on something more generalized, which is air quality, which that's made perhaps a reasonable choice to make. My question is, and if someday a court of competent jurisdiction were to say that the mistakes that the Union Pacific Coal Company made in the 1920s in building a dangerous earthen levee in downtown Rock Springs that presents a great danger to property and life through flooding, if a court of competent jurisdiction were someday to decide that that's eligible for priority one AML funds, would your agency exercise its discretion to spend the funds in that manner, or would it continue to spend it on other things?
So, Mr. Chairman, so if hypothetically it's determined that that project is eligible for AML funds, then yes, we would put it on the priority list as a P1, P2, or P3 project and fund that as appropriate.
Director, I have one question, and this would be for the official record, and I want to get you on the record. Is there any hidden pots of money that you're unaware of?
Yes.
Representative Larson.
So I think the committee will recall that we had a similar exercise with the agency last year in closing out some leftover balances that we got rid of to where we could close them out. In as reviewing this one, Director Parfit, it's come to our attention that back in 2016, we'd kind of done a similar thing. And I don't know, there was 2.95 million that was left over that was appropriated. And of that, there's 146,000 that's unspent that has, and maybe Dawn might be able to help us with this, but there's an expenditure that has a contingency for UW for a UW level 2 study for WWAMI. And it can't do that until this money, this 146,000 is spent. And are you aware of that? Or maybe we could provide you some information. So we're saying, you know, can we get that spent so that they can move on and perhaps Mr.
Kevin, you
Richards
want to
can give us a
clarify or
little.
want?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we do receive a monthly report from their CFO, Mr. Tolson,
And at the time, there was concern because you'll recall Senator Baucus from Montana put a hold essentially on Wyoming's money. And then Senator Barrasso removed that hole in dueling bills. And there was a question whether or not AML funds could be held up again. And we did not have sufficient general funds to replace those AML funds if the federal funds stopped flowing. So what the legislature did back in 2016 and said, you can't spend general funds. You put that requirement on that until the AML funds are spent. And I believe DEQ has about $130,000 of that $2.6 million appropriation that they're spending on air quality. As a result, there is a $350,000 appropriation to the university that is now 7 years old that they cannot access until DEQ fully expends their funds.
Mischief.
Are you aware of this particular?
Can you help us?
So, Mr. Chairman, I am aware that we have additional funds that need to be spent, and I believe that's in air quality and solid waste. And we've had discussions internally about that to make sure that we do that. My preference would be before the end of the year, but as expeditiously as possible. And so it's money that's split between the two divisions that could be quickly dispensed with, covering monitoring costs and covering other
So Todd,
orphan sites.
could you just, we'll have a round robin or some type of further appropriations meetings just before session begins in January. If you can just provide us a report that shows that that has taken place. So then we can pass on the information to UW and allow them to have access to their money.
Mr. Chairman, we'll do that.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions for Tom? All right. Look at that, 5:45. Pretty good. 4:45. Well, we got another hour. Yeah.
Land or map.
Okay, thanks a lot.
All right.
And company. Thanks, Alan.
Oh, hey, before you dismiss.
Okay. Oh, before this. Okay, yeah.
We're good?
Yep, we're good.
So,
Thanks.
Bob,
Let's have a quick meeting after these guys leave the room. Just to talk about tomorrow.
Okay, we've got another presentation.
tonight,
It's just a short one.
promises. When do we recap with staff?
Or
Well, at the end of each day, don't we recap with staff on
Yeah.
what the requests were and that sort of thing, and open items? Or
well, we asked Don if there are any open items we talked about. But we usually don't do it every. We usually don't do it every single.
Okay.
We're adjourned.